This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I ask everyone to make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? And can I now ask Hannah Barlow, our clerk, if any apologies for absence have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies received from the Assembly Member Desai and Assembly Member Polanski. Assembly Member Moema and Assembly Member Garbett are here as substitutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Well, welcome to the committee for those who aren't normally here. Before we get to our main item this morning, we're looking at housing. We have a couple of quick bits of housekeeping to do. So can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted. Noted. Good. Well noted. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the ongoing actions arising from its previous meetings? Noted. Excellent. And response to committee output. Can I ask the committee to note the response from the Mayor of London to our letter on the 2023-24 GLA Group Budget outturn as attached at Appendix 1, and also, wait for it, the response from the Head of Performance at GLA to one of the recommendations in our letter on the 2025-26 budget process as attached at Appendix 2. Good, well noted. Excellent. Right, so we now come to our main item this morning, which is a discussion focusing on the 2025-26 GLA group budget, particularly the housing element of that. We have 3 panels this morning. This first panel, I think, probably about 2 hours approximately, and then we'll take a short comfort break at that point. So the first part will focus on GLA and affordable housing programme, and the second part will focus on functional body affordable housing programme. So could I welcome to our first panel of guests Lynn Garner, who's the GLA head for housing delivery. Morning, Lynn. Tim Steer, who's the executive director for housing at the GLA. Morning, Tim. Heather Duman, the assistant director of housing at the GLA. Morning. Tajmina Jetha, head of programme management at the GLA. Apologies if I've mangled your name. Simon Powell, Assistant Director of Strategic Projects and Property at the GLA. Morning, Simon. Kate Webb, Head of Housing Strategy and Policy at the GLA. And Megan Life, Head of Specialist Housing and Services, Specialist Housing and Services at GLA. Good morning. So, if I kick off with the first question to you, Lynn. It's a sort of general opening question. So how can the GLA deliver on the Mayor's housing manifesto commitments for this term within the existing level of resources?
I think quite well, actually. And what's surprising, as we'll hear when Tim gives us a more detailed breakdown of where we are, is that the GLA has done incredibly well, actually, when we look at the circumstances in the market that are facing us at the moment. So the team are continuing to drive through housing and affordable housing on sites despite the challenges that we face. Those challenges are now really starting to slow delivery down a little, and we'll hear the reality of that. And I think we're familiar with what those challenges are. We're facing the most difficult circumstances in decades, including the collapse of the Icelandic banks in 2007-8, much worse than then, because we've had a bit of a perfect storm of issues all coming at the same time that you may well be familiar with, including building regulation and lack of clarity around building regulation, huge construction inflation, huge interest rate rises, which mean the availability of money to invest from the private sector is simply not there. And also our ability to borrow at reasonable levels is not available to us either. So huge challenges that I'm sure we'll get into during the debate. But actually, when we look at the delivery over the last 12 to 18 months, team's done really well. I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that.
I'm sure we will. Can I, just in terms of sort of overall context, so when we think about the housing problem in London, what we're really thinking about is the gap between wages and housing costs, whether people are renting, which I suppose most people are, or buying, as some people might. It's obviously that gap between the two is what we would call the housing affordability problem. So when I think about the Mayor's, well, across the whole GLA group, housing programmes, are those housing programmes capable of continuing to work if that gap actually narrows? So in other words, if house prices or rent costs come down, or if wages go up, which obviously would feed through to construction inflation, do you sort of stress test the business cases to make sure that if it actually achieves what we're hoping it to do, which is to narrow that gap, it actually is capable of still delivering?
What happens is that the policy framework is quite strong around planning and affordable housing, but it's responsive to viability. And what we're able to do is have a look at the viability of individual schemes, test that in the market as things are changing, whether it be in affordability of incomes or indeed affordability of building the things, if you like. And the key to that is being able to flex policies and movements with the viability situation. And that is where in the planning team, there's a team looking at viability and making those decisions all of the time in conjunction with the housing and land team who may be able to assist with funding. So it's a very dynamic process, actually. So I think we are responsive to those sorts of movements. We are able to be responsive. I mean, at the moment, demand for housing is extremely high and we're feeling pressure all across the sector, including in the private sector, where a lot of landlords have pulled out of the market over time, and there is pressure on that market for all sorts of housing at all sorts of affordability levels.
But do you stress test the business model in this? So let's say rents come off by 5%. Now, that would still, to most Londoners, look like a pretty expensive rent, but would that create a viability problem for the projects that the Mayor's programme is trying to deliver?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to be right close to a particular viability model to talk to that particular 5%. But if the rents drop, then the investor is not getting the return that they would expect. So something else would have to give in the model.
I suppose what I'm really asking is this whole project predicated on the assumption that the problem that it's trying to solve doesn't get solved? Do you see what I mean?
Well, no, to some degree. So we've got a situation in housing in this country, frankly, not just in London, where we depend on what I call a subsidy model. So we rely on the private sector to subsidise the affordable sector. And what that means is when the private sector cannot deliver, and in this case, we've also got difficulties with registered social landlords because they're concentrating on their stock at the moment and doing less development. Well, we cannot rely on the private sector because it cannot borrow money at reasonable rates to invest in the product, then the subsidy model doesn't work as well as it should do.
Yeah.
And that's when we need to get innovative and interventionist, in my view, as the public sector, because we're here for the long term and we can afford to invest for the long term into products like affordable housing, which are essentially pieces of social infrastructure for the country. So, yes, I think we can intervene, but we have had to put our thinking caps on over the past 12 months and think about where we can innovate. And I know that the team can talk in more depth about that, particularly Kate, and around the City Hall developer work that we've been doing and the thinking in that space.
We'll be coming on to, as you'd expect. OK, thank you, Lynn. Tim, sort of opening question. What challenges and opportunities do you anticipate in the delivery of the housing target for 25-26? And perhaps tied up with that, what, if anything, was the impact of the autumn budget that we've just seen in that delivery?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've talked quite a bit with the committee about the challenges which exist. I think Lynn has also begun to set some of those out. I think all of the things that we've talked to you before about in terms of challenges still exist, and those really do affect the viability of housing development. We've talked about construction costs, we've talked about contractor insolvencies, we've talked about regulatory change, we've talked about the fact that sales rates and values for market housing are constrained, and that also impacts the ability of partners to bring forward affordable housing. But there's also a set of challenges around our delivery agents for affordable housing, who are all facing quite difficult circumstances themselves, and their financial capacity is in many cases really quite constrained. While they want to be working on ambitious development programmes, they really see the need for new affordable housing in London. At the same time, there's also a huge need, and they see this need to invest in their existing stock, and they're under immense pressure to do that because of some of the issues we've got around stock condition, which have been so well publicised. And for boroughs, as we know, they've got a general financial issues which they're dealing with, and the cost of their temporary accommodation, for example, really puts pressure on their ability to develop. So some of those issues affecting the Affordable Homes Programme are really quite fundamental, and they need some fundamental responses. You know, in terms of the 21 to 26 programme and our delivery next year, and this year and next year, we'll be working flat out to deliver absolutely everything we can. And actually, you mentioned the budget. There was some positivity in the budget. There was a commitment to consult on a long-term social rent settlement, which is really quite important in terms of that financial capacity of partners. But that really needs to come through in terms of a long-term, reliable funding stream, and it needs to come through above inflation, not least because other measures in the budget have created downwards pressure too, like the changes in national insurance. So, I mean, I suppose the budget was positive and helpful in a limited sense. I think some of the big impacts on delivery under the programme are still to come. There's still quite a few decisions to be made. We've got decisions we're talking to the Ministry about in terms of what we can do on this programme to maximise delivery, which is still underway. And equally, we've got a comprehensive spending review coming up. And I talked about some of those wider pressures on our delivery partners. And the comprehensive spending review is really where some of that can and should be addressed in terms of funding, particularly funding for existing stock, whether that might be access for housing associations to the Building Safety Fund, for example, to pay for cladding remediation, or kind of wider work with local authorities to support their financial position, particularly looking at the housing revenue account and the debt settlement there and whether that can be reformed. And so some of those things are really quite big decisions for the government to make, but they will have a pretty fundamental impact on our immediate term delivery as well as our longer term delivery too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the CSR, but you've effectively answered that. So it's really, it's the impact, it would be, I guess what you're saying is easing the pressures on the affordable housing sector, whether that's housing associations or council housing revenue accounts, because if they have their pressure, then it becomes difficult for them to, for example, to take on those new affordable or subsidised, as I think of them, homes within the new build. So, I mean, I suppose this is a concern I had with Lynn. So on the one hand, you know, we know about those pressures on the sector, the affordable housing sector, and then on the other hand, that sort of throws a spotlight on the private sector effectively to fund that through cross subsidy. So then, you know, this is where my question, which I'm not going to, you know, let's not go back over it, but where I do have a question in my mind that actually this then does seem to be dependent on the assumption that house prices remain very strong, rents remain very high, and if they don't, then actually that sort of undermines everything else, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally true to say that the rate and value of market sales does play an important part in the viability mix. But there are a huge number of factors in that, and also just to say that one of the things which is causing an issue at the moment is that while there's a huge need for housing across London, the demand for market purchases is actually not particularly strong at the moment because house prices are so high, and so actually sales rates aren't where they would ideally be. And I think if prices came down a bit, that would improve those sales rates. So I think, you know, there's quite a bit going on there.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's enough from me for now. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. If I can pick up on that, clearly if far more houses are built, the property price rise may go down because demand, I mean, there'll be far more supply for the demand. So just to pick up on that, the biggest question I've got, you will probably have noticed, the only time I ever get involved in housing is on the Budget Committee. So forgive me if I ask questions that may seem daft. But the one thing that has concerned me over the years, and reading through all the briefing here, it's the fact that you've never got, or very rarely got to the 50%. The 50% seems to elude so many of these business models on LLDC, OPDC. It just doesn't get there. It gets to, I think, 32%, 35%, etc. Isn't the 50% far too high? Because when I was talking to private developers last year, and I spoke to quite a few, it seems to put people off building. And at the moment, the biggest thing that we need is more homes built. So putting this 50% in, I would consider it a hindrance, but you understand housing far better than I do. Is it not a massive hindrance to have to get to 50%?
Just so one point of clarification first, and then I'll come back to the thrust of the question. So it's 50. There's a 50% requirement on public land.
Yes.
And that's, you know, that's supposed to account for the, you know, potentially land values being lower and so on, and being able to accommodate that. The general requirement for developers on their own land, on private land, is 35%. But the real important point here is that that is a threshold so that they can achieve a fast-track route through the planning process. It's not an absolute requirement. And so what I mean, we haven't got any planners here today, and maybe there should be a separate session on planning at some stage. But the way that the policy is designed is it's supposed to maximise the level of affordable housing which is possible given the overall viability of the scheme. So no scheme which can't afford 35% or 50% on public land should it shouldn't fail on those grounds, and that's why you'll see some of those rates coming through, for example, on LODC or GLAP types of projects. There are lower than 50% rates, and that's because a full viability assessment has been gone through to understand what the maximum level of affordable housing is. If developers can come and say, look, we can achieve 35% or 50%, then that simplifies the process. That allows them to go through a fast-track route. They don't need to go through the viability route. But it's not a threshold which means that that housing cannot come forward if it can't achieve those levels. So I think it's quite a nuanced and actually demonstrably effective approach which has been developed in London, and I think there's quite a lot of conversation about whether this type of approach could be used more widely because it has been so effective. Okay. Oh, Simon.
Just to add as well, in relation to the Mayor's own land holdings through GA Land and Property, since the Mayor's target of 50% on public land, every disposal that we've taken to the market as a new release of land, we have achieved 50%. So St Anne's, which is under delivery at the moment, is 60%. We're about to announce early in the new year North Middlesex, who the successful developer and registered provider is on that site, and that will be significantly more than 50%. And we've also recently, as the London plan allows for, we have adopted, like Transport for London, Places for London, have got, in terms of a portfolio agreement, to get to a 50% across a portfolio of sites.
Okay. All right. I'm just concerned that clearly something causes it to stall. I mean, however much, Lynn, over the years I've been listening to you, Lynn, saying how well you're doing, we're not achieving the numbers we want to. There's always a reason we're not. Every time I've listened to you, you've given a whole load of reasons why it's not happening. I was wondering whether the 50% was something that, if it was removed, might just allow more houses to be built, which is what we all want. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hall. Before we go to the next question, I have a quick comment from Assemblymember Moema.
Thank you, Chair. I just neglected, well, I wasn't sure if I needed to declare an interest, and I'm not sure if my register has been updated, but just to notify you that I've been appointed a trustee of Crisis, the homelessness charity, so just to avoid any confusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's noted. Assemblymember Georgiou.
Over my career in local government, the biggest load of gaslighting around development that I've ever heard tends to be around viability, and which then relates to affordable housing, and then in addition to that, threats over lack of 106 contributions. So, Lynn, this is more of a modelling question for you. So time and time again across London, we get many a greedy developer going for significant levels of affordable housing, sometimes past the 35%, in order to sweet talk the planning committee And then what happens is they salami slice that down with successive planning applications. So they've already got their foot in the door with the first one. Then planning committees are essentially bouncing to keep approving subsequent applications. So the key thing they use as an excuse for that is viability. It always tends to be viability. Therefore, it goes back to the point that they're bald-faced liars. Having said that, when you're looking at your modelling for upcoming affordable housing, are you monitoring this salami slicing down of reviewed applications?
When you say, am I monitoring it, do you mean for LLDC? Are you asking me a particular question about the Legacy Corporation or in the round?
In the round, not LLDC.
Yeah. So I don't have the site of all of those schemes in London. The officers might have a few. Every time an application comes forward for planning, it will be interrogated to get the maximum affordable housing, and there's an opportunity for the planners to go through that process. It's not the case that you can bring forward later phases and manage to negotiate lower levels of affordable housing without going through a process. So there's a process at every stage that would have, you know, an audit trail behind it, essentially, as to why that's happened.
You're implying that, and I've yet to find one London borough, and I appreciate we've got one leader here, so I don't want to disparage his council, but I've yet to find a group of planning officers who haven't been dictated to by their political leaders. You've got to pass everything that comes across your desk, and planning committees that aren't essentially bounced into passing everything that comes to planning committee. I'm not saying that happens every time. The point I'm trying to make is you're using reason in your answer when in fact the planning system in many instances is rigged in favour of developers that are not honest from the beginning. I'm not saying that happens in every instance, but there are a lot to use. And if ever you need an example, you're more than welcome to come to Enfield, and I'll show you some of those applications. So am I right in saying you don't, it's not a trick question, I would have been surprised if you had this information, you don't monitor all of the salami slicing down, but is that something you think you could look into?
We do, yeah. If we expect to see 40%, 50%, 35% affordable housing across the whole scheme, we at the London level,
right, and
then that is watered down somehow, we will know about it.
Okay.
Because it will have come through the planning system here at City Hall at some point and would have to be approved.
Well, I think that would be over 150 units, wouldn't it? So therefore it wouldn't be all applications.
Well, if you have an outline planning approval for 1,000 units, what you're implying is that subsequent planning applications, detailed planning applications for the phases, later phases, can be watered down to a lower level. And that's not the case because the original approval was at a higher level. So I think I'm right in saying the City Hall would have a say in that.
Well, certainly for all of the referable schemes to City Hall, as you say. But in terms of the way that those planning conditions interact with grant, I don't know whether Kate can say anything on this, but you know, in terms of grant conditions, the team in Housing and Land who provide the grant work really closely with the planners to ensure that there is, you know, real visibility of the way that grant is being used to enable schemes, and if there were changes to, for example, levels of affordable housing in kind of subsequent planning applications, we would be cited on that and take that. You know, that, I don't know, Kate, how would you express that?
Well, sorry, if it helps, Kate, just before we come to you, I just close it off here because I think there's a bit of conflation. It's not the officer's fault. Where we are, I think we're talking across purposes. So you're referring to grants and solely possibly GLA schemes. I'm looking at every time the mayor makes an announcement, under my mayoralty, X number of affordable homes have been built, X number of homes overall have been built. That can sometimes be misleading, and it may not be his fault because the numbers go up to him. But the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think any public body in this country is monitoring this particular issue, where developers, not even at subsequent phases, from the initial, going back to the initial scheme. So that's my concern. I appreciate we won't have an answer today, but it'd be good if we could take this conversation offline.
I would like to come back, if you don't mind. Having worked in many boroughs in London, I think that we can't comment here on the politics that goes on at planning committees across the boroughs, and in particular for schemes that are under the size that are referable to the mayor. every borough has to produce an annual monitoring report that sets out all of its permissions and all of its levels of housing and affordable housing, and it has a set of targets in the London Plan which it's supposed to be meeting. And that's where, to answer your question on the monitoring, we will expose what's actually gone on in the borough over a period of time, because it's obligated to produce that report on an annual basis, and it's picked up in that monitoring framework.
Okay. I'll leave it there.
I was just going to say, I was just going to remind everyone that this is the Budget and Performance Committee rather than the Housing and Planning Committee. With that in mind, sorry, Assemblymember Garbutt, you had a question.
Yeah, just in the field of viability. So, morning, everybody. I'm just concerned that we have a target that's been set by the Mayor to achieve affordable homes, and then we've got a viability assessment process that seems to undermine that. And there's, the viability process has been widely criticised by lots of organisations. So I guess my question is about whether we're looking at how that viability assessment is working and whether we're looking at reviewing that to make sure that we can achieve the homes and the targets that we've got, because they seem to be used, similar line of questioning to the developer's advantage.
I mean, just to say, I do think it's a question we need to put to the planners in more detail, but, the viability process as set out in the London Plan and it is designed to support the Mayor's targets for affordable housing. Now, you could have a detailed conversation about whether it's working. I'm probably not the right person to have it with, but...
Okay, thank you. So I think we now move on back to Assemblymember Georgiou for the next question.
Thank you, Chair. Under the proposed changes to the MPPF, London's housing need could be set at 81,000 new homes every year. Given the challenges, sorry, this is for Tim and Lynn, by the way. Given the challenges facing the house building sector, how realistic is this level of delivery?
Shall I come in? I mean, I think it's really clear that it's extremely challenging. Nobody would argue, I don't think, with the assessment of that London has that kind of housing need. And so we totally share the ambition of the government to deliver at that scale. And we're working really, really hard with government on a very broad level. So outside of our current programmes, which are set out in the budget, we're having much more strategic conversations with our planning team and with government about what it takes to get to that kind of level of housing delivery. I guess the market is in a very, very difficult position, as Lynn set out at the beginning. Current delivery rates are at more like the kind of 30-odd thousand level. We have in the recent past been at kind of 45,000 a year. But that was in a period of historically low interest rates and Help to Buy existed. So, those kinds of levels, which do reflect the need, will be extremely challenging, and it will take some pretty radical thinking and radical approaches. And we're, very much in those discussions at the moment. Part of this is, comes out of City Hall. Part of this is about planning, and the work to develop a new London plan is ongoing. But part of it is about how we address some of those kind of fundamental issues which are kind of blocking up the market at the moment. And I talked about some of those at the beginning in terms of the ability of the people who actually deliver the homes, housing associations, boroughs, in particular in the affordable housing space, to pursue the kinds of ambitious development programmes that they want. As it stands at the moment, a number of the bigger housing associations are saying to us that if things don't change, then we just won't be able to develop over the long term, or at least for the next kind of 5 to 10 years. And so what we need is to work through what changes we can bring in this space. And I think it is some of those things which I talked about at the beginning. It is about unlocking their ability to invest in their existing housing stock, and that in turn freeing up their capacity to invest in the new supply that we all want.
Thanks, Lynn. Was there anything you wanted to add to that? No? Great, thank you. And then if someone could just provide me a number, and thank you, by the way, Tim, for the very comprehensive answer. What would the GLA element of this 81,000 target be?
It's a slightly difficult question because, we will do delivery under our programme. So there's affordable housing under our programmes, but there's equally affordable housing that comes through the planning system. Our target for the 21 to 26 affordable homes programme is a range of between about 23,000 and about 27,000 starts up until March 2026. We're still working with government on what the next AHP affordable homes programme will look like post March 26 and what the targets for that will be. So I'm sorry, it's not a number.
No, that's the best answer you can give at the moment, so thank you, Chair.
Okay, Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Just to go back to the last bit. Tim, 81,000 homes a year. Why don't we say that's impossible and use proper language as opposed to challenging? Challenging looks like it's a possibility we'll get there. Does anybody on this committee think that 81,000 properties a year is achievable at all?
I think it's my job to try and work with the people who can make the decisions to try and get as close to that as possible, make that possible, to try and understand what interventions would have what effect. I don't think, I don't want to say it's impossible. I believe in the need for those kinds of levels, and I want to do everything we possibly can to
we all
work
do,
towards them.
Surely we should be a bit realistic here. There's nothing that's ever realistic around housing. Why don't we aim for something that could be achieved? 81,000 new properties a year. Well, if you think you can do it, great, but we'll be sitting here this time next year. And we both know it's going to be far less than that. Why don't we put in figures that can actually be achieved, that we can really go for, as opposed to something that's so beyond our capability that it's pie in the sky?
Just in kind of process terms, what's happened so far is that the government has set out a housing needs assessment for London of 81,000, and that's being consulted on through the MPPF consultation. I think the consultation will conclude and the government will establish their final housing needs assessment for London, and then the next thing that will happen is that the new London plan will set out London's approach to delivering its housing need, and that will formally set out targets. And so it may well be that that's the place where we come to conclusions on this. And
when do you think the London plan will be out? Because that's the other issue. There's so many issues within the London plan that make it difficult for delivery, so I'm told by developers. So when approximately will that be out?
There's a fairly long timetable on a revision to the London plan, which is set out in statute, but Kate's probably got the dates.
No, just briefly, because I'm...
Yeah, so the plan is to release a high-level document in the new year, before spring proper. The planning team is still aiming to consult on a draft new London plan by the end of 2025, with adoption in 2027.
See, everything takes so long, no wonder we're not getting things built. So to my question, Tim, where would establishing new mayoral development corporations and land assembly zones help to unlock affordable housing?
Yeah, and we're very much in that work at the moment. So obviously since the mayoral manifesto commitments, and particularly since the government's needs assessment, we've been, and actually I think since long before that, because even the existing London plan sets out a view of London's development opportunity areas, and so that work continues. We are looking with ever more specificity about what areas are going to bring forward the kind of housing capacity that we need to meet that target, and then looking at what kind of tools maybe help delivery in those areas. So I think, we'll be able to say more about MDCs and LAZs in the coming months as we do that work. I think the other important thing to say is, again, some of this, particularly, Lynn might want to say more about MDCs being in charge of one, but all of these things take resources, and resources which City Hall has very limited amounts of, and so again, the comprehensive spending review is really, really important in all of this, and London's ability to work with government on securing the resources London needs to deliver those kinds of numbers is going to be really important.
Okay. Everything seems to take so long. How many people are actually working in your department?
Well, in the whole directorate, there are around 230 people, but that's spread across a number of different things alongside housing supply.
Yeah, okay, fine. Going back to the mayoral development corporations, what are the options for funding?
Well, as I say, I think the comprehensive spending review is going to be really important. We do have some limited resource within the directorate. We had what's called the Land Fund, which was a revolving fund provided by government a few years ago. And some of the investments that were made through that fund are now starting to repay, so that creates some headroom. So we have some ability to invest. We're very much looking at that headroom in relation to City Hall developer, and Simon can say a bit more about City Hall developer later, but that's really looking at what opportunities we can take to invest alongside the private sector. And invest in things like MDCs if they're relevant for locations. So we do have some limited resource that we can take forward, but it's not going to be in any way sufficient to kind of meet the need that we've got.
Okay, thanks. How much under development land does the GLA own on which it would be viable to actually build houses?
Can I bring Simon in on the GLA land question?
Yeah, sure. Assembly Member Hall. So the Mayor directly owns some 635 hectares of land. Approximately 200 hectares of that is not developable, so it's things like 100 hectares of dock bed water outside the front of City Hall here in the Royal Docks. The vast majority of that circa 435 hectares of land is in development. There is still some land that we're taking forward at the moment for release. There's a scheme in Waltham Forest, and there's one in Tower Hamlets, both of circa 500 homes that we're taking to the market in the next 6 months or so. But the vast majority of that land is as I said, is in contract and is coming forward with, in totality, up to the next sort of 25 years, 68,000 homes. That's the Mayor's direct, so that's through GLA Land and Property.
68,000, and I guess we'd be looking at least 10 years, because everything that's in this briefing has got about a 10-year slide to it.
This is over, 20 years.
20 years?
Yeah.
Right, I'm just...
That's the Mayor's direct, then there's obviously also the functional bodies, so LLDC...
Everything
APDC.
seems to take so long. It must be frustrating for you. It's certainly frustrating for me reading all these documents, because everything is, well, we'll deliver in 10 years, 12 years, 20 years. If there's 230 people in your directorate, how much does that actually cost the taxpayer? How much does your directorate cost?
I don't know the answer to that, actually. Do you mean in terms of staffing?
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't know the figure.
Ballpark figure.
Has anyone got a sense of that figure?
It is set out in the draft budget, because there's a breakdown per teams in housing and land in the draft budget.
I'm sorry, I just don't have it to my mind, but we can certainly let you have it. Can I just make a point about the long-term nature of delivery? And it is really, really true that housing development is a long-term business, but I also just want to highlight the fact that what Simon said was about a whole series of things that we've got coming to market right now. So while we've got a long pipeline, and things do take a long time, and there are limitations on how much you can bring forward because of the market needs to happen over a long time, but we're also doing things right now.
Tim, I understand that, but I've been on the Assembly 8 years, and it's always another 10 years, and year after year that we are not building anything like the amount of properties we need to. Billions and billions of pounds are going into this. Londoners need homes desperately, and if this was the first meeting I'd ever been to, and I'd think, yeah, that's fair enough, but I've been doing this for 8 years, and it's always, in another 10 years, in whatever. And we talk about starts. You can't live in a start. We should be talking about completions, because that's what people can live in.
Slightly prickly about this, but, just a couple of years ago, we, the team which we're talking about, achieved kind of record-breaking starts to 25,000 homes in 22-23. We achieved a target of 116,000 homes under the 16 to 23 affordable homes programme. And in terms of completions, while that 116,000 will be completing out into late into this decade, already 70-odd thousand of those homes have completed. So, while there is always a pipeline out into the future of what we're doing, and it's incumbent on us to ensure that pipeline is in place for the long term, we are also delivering in the short term as well, to the extent that we can in very, very, very difficult circumstances.
Okay, Londoners are prickly about it as well, but thank you, Chair.
Okay. Before we move on, I just had a quick question about mayoral development corporations, because this seems to become an interesting theme. We have two that exist, London Legacy Development Corporation and the Old Oak Park Royal. I kind of somehow, in my mind, relate the letters OPDC to the four words. Anyway, that one, the West London one. And obviously there's a proposal for one on Oxford Street, which seems to be in the PR primarily about pedestrianisation, but obviously an MDC is primarily about development. From the way you're talking, there are possibly others in discussion in the pipeline?
I think MDCs are certainly one tool which could be used to promote housing development. So I think what's really important is that we start with the areas and the sites and what they need. So I don't think we wouldn't want to predetermine tools for particular areas or say that we're going to do kind of 3 MDCs or something. But I think certainly when you look around some sites in London, if it is questions, for example, around planning, which is where, land assembly, which is where OPDC is really focused. If that's the issue which is holding back development, then that is where you might consider an MDC. So they are very much kind of in the mix as tools, as our land assembly zones. But it needs to kind of flow from that detailed work on the kind of opportunity areas, the barriers to development, and what tools, and it may be in some cases actually it's more about providing some infrastructure funding or something like that, which wouldn't be relevant for an MDC. So. Okay,
it's just you recognise that. I appreciate the way you talk like that, but the way that lands with boroughs who have those powers is the mayor, in inverted commas, GLA, thinks that he can swoop in, take powers from the boroughs and do a better job. That isn't what you said, but that is how it would be heard, I think, by boroughs. So I just want to flag up the fact that, that there are many parties in this conversation, and some of them don't always necessarily think that the mayor taking control is a guaranteed winner. I don't want to dwell on that, but it was interesting that does seem to be an idea that's being kicked around. So apologies for spending extra time on that, talking about things taking too long. Assemblymember Clark.
Yes, thank you for that. I recognise there's some, Tim, you've been picked on a lot so far this morning, but I'm going to continue on that thread, I'm afraid. But you've talked about starts and completions, but just coming back to the 25-26 budget, how many homes is the mayor expecting you to deliver in that budget?
Through the Affordable Homes Programme?
Yes.
Yeah, but as I say, the overall target for the Affordable Homes Programme up until March 26, so in the year until that deadline next year, the overall target is 23,000 something to 27,000 something. Delivery, as we've talked about with the committee before, delivery often follows a kind of hockey stick pattern in these programmes because of the way that it works with our partners and their planning processes, and we would very much expect to be we'd hope to be on a kind of steep upward trajectory towards the back end of this programme. That said, it's really hard to put a number on delivery for next year because of some of the uncertainties that we're talking about and some of the decisions which still need to be made, which will very much impact our ability and our partners' ability to deliver next year. So, and I think about this in terms of kind of in-programme things and out-of-programme things. So we're in discussion with government about in-programme programme delivery and anything we can do with government to try and support the particular circumstances that our partners are in. We already, earlier in the year, we got a couple of flexibilities from government around this programme, which were publicised at the time. One example being some flexibility around how we treat intermediate rent. But there are other things which we're currently in discussion about, so that's kind of in-programme things that will affect delivery next year. And then there's these kind of much bigger questions about out-of-programme. This really comes back to, and I won't rehearse it all again, but the things that will unlock our partners' financial capacity, some of which has been kind of talked about in the budget and some progress been made on in the budget, but really the comprehensive spending review is the place where that's going to be. Some of that is going to come to fruition, I hope.
Okay, and in terms of tenure and size of these properties, what what considerations? I mean, what do you consider when you're thinking about the tenure and size of these properties? Because I can see there's sometimes with particularly larger planning applications or larger regeneration sites, you do get a particular mix. Is there something that's overall considered within these targets?
So, just to say, I mean, in general, the kind of tenure split and the size of the properties and so on is determined through the planning process. So that's, not the bit which we in Housing and Land are involved in. I think in terms of the way that we prioritise within the programme, there's a clear, one thing we know, the one thing the planners know, and one thing we all know is that there's a, severe need for social rented homes. Yeah. And so that's a clear priority for us in the grant programme. It's a clear priority for government as well, and there's some target proportions of social rent within our MOU with government, and in some ways, I think that can be it has been quite helpful over the last few months to really focus on social rent because there's more grant available for social rent, and it helps with some of the viability questions too. So there's been a general push towards social rent wherever we can really.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, just I'm going to ask you a related question about cladding, but last week the government announced a radical action to speed up the removal of unsafe cladding, following on from the £1 billion of support announced in the autumn statement. How, if at all, has this been factored into funds allocated for building safety and remediation?
Yeah, I think, so we're working really closely with government on their thinking around accelerating remediation. It's really, really important work, particularly in the wake of the Phase 2 of the Grenfell inquiry report. It's absolutely fundamental that we speed up how these buildings are being remediated. As you'll be aware, GLA manages 3 specific programmes within the kind of wider cladding remediation kind of government approach. But more broadly, we're in conversation with government around their aspiration to speed up. The real focus of their national remediation acceleration plan, which they published, as you say, last week, is to work with local areas to try and bring local partners together, to try and understand what some of the barriers are and kind of bust through those. We're right in those conversations with government now about what that means for London. I think everyone recognises the scale of the challenge in London is just huge and vastly different than anywhere else in the country. And I think, it's too early to say, I think, how that will affect the programmes that we are operating directly. But I suspect there will be impacts in a really good way, hopefully, in ways that allow us to changes that allow us to speed up remediation in partnership with government.
Great.
Assembly Member Garbett, I think you had a question on this.
Thanks. Just going back to the overall 1.069 million in the draft budget. Obviously, we've spoken a lot already about the time it takes to build homes. So I just wanted to reflect on the acquisitions, and obviously the new Economics Foundation found that acquiring homes can be bigger, we can get them quicker, it obviously meets our kind of net zero carbon targets. So I just wondered how much of this expenditure is expected to go towards acquisitions.
Can I bring you in, Kate?
Yeah, I think we've discussed at previous committees that we are restricted by the terms of our MOU with government in how much expenditure can go towards acquisitions. So only 10% of the programme can go towards true sort of second-hand acquisitions, and then there are other types of acquisitions that could take us up to a 30% limit. But we are overall bound, and I think that's probably the right balance, to be honest, given that this is fundamentally a programme about enabling new supply. We, as I think you'll be aware, have a very prominent council housing acquisition programme, which we market very loudly to local authorities. So grant is available where local authorities wish to acquire. I think 2 important things to note is, one is we do have competitors for that grant, essentially, both in the form of the government's own local authority housing fund, which is directly administered grant from MHCLG, and crucially, they are able to administer without some of the legal restrictions that are in place on the GLA. So it can be a more advantageous fund for local authorities. But also the right to buy flexibilities around how local authorities can use their receipts. They've obviously been very much welcomed by the Mayor and many within local government. But the deliberate intent of those is to make it easier for local authorities to use their own receipts to fund acquisitions. So we have two competitors to our CHAP programme. And also this is where Tim's earlier comments about local authority capacity come in. You know, we know that looked at just from the push factors of, say, numbers in TA, numbers on waiting lists, that of course local authorities would be wanting to both build at scale and acquire at scale. But their HRA pressures do mean that they are limited in whether they can realise our ambitions. And that's why, going back to Tim's point, we are continuing to talk to government about what you do kind of out of programme to ensure that local authorities have the financial resilience to make use of the tools that we in central government are offering them.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting within the context that we've been talking about the difficulties and the constraints around construction, that obviously it would just be good to have some flexibility around that to kind of urgently get those affordable homes. And I just wondered if there's a replacement for the 1 million right to buy back revenue fund to accelerate the delivery of the CHAP. Is that happening?
At the moment, we're not judging that that's necessary. I think we saw that both the right to buy capital fund and the revenue fund was a really good kickstarter for local authorities to help give them the tools that they need to acquire. The messages we're getting from local authorities are that they don't need a continuation of the revenue fund. What they need is both the capital, which is on offer, but also those broader changes, particularly around their HRA and public works loan borrowing costs, so that they can access these. They don't need revenue support to engage with the programme.
That's really helpful. And one quick final follow-up on this question. The land for council homes revenue fund ends this year, so is there a plan to replace that one?
So I think that's part of what we would look for a City Hall Developer Investment Fund to move into similar territory towards. Obviously, the revenue fund that you've referred to was about supporting councils to build up their pipelines of supply. I think it's fair to say that they're now in a different phase of development cycles where we're not seeing local authorities looking to acquire new sites. They're frankly focused on their existing sites and how they can safeguard those programmes. And that's why we're looking through the council housing developer, the City Hall developer, to be able to set in and have another public sector intervention to be able to acquire sites, bring them to market and deploy them quickly for affordable housing.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Oops. Thank you. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. My question is to Tim, and you may want to extend it to one of your colleagues. Despite City Hall's rough sleeping expenditure increasing since 2016, numbers of people rough sleeping in London have continued to grow, and obviously it's particularly obvious at this time of the year when temperatures are dropping. So I want to know what your plans are to ensure that the Mayor is going to meet his manifesto of ending rough sleeping by 2030, and what, if any, contingency plans are in place if that's not possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I will bring Megan in on this, but just to say, the Mayor's manifesto commitment around ending rough sleeping clearly has meant that we're in a strategic thinking space at the moment, and we've been thinking very hard with partners around what that means and what new thinking we need to bring to bear in this space. And we've been working on a plan of action which will set out some new approaches and be published in the new year. But I'll let Megan come in.
Thanks. Yeah. I think the first thing to say is obviously this isn't a position anybody wants to be in, having unprecedented numbers of rough sleeping in London, nearly 12,000 rough sleepers last year. And I think the kind of scale of that challenge and just how much we need to do to meet the manifesto commitment kind of, as Tim says, speaks to us having to do things really quite differently and think really innovatively about how we approach this problem. And absolutely, the Mayor's plan of action will be kind of key to setting out our strategy on that. I kind of wanted to just point to a few things that kind of some of the substance of the challenges that we're facing here. So the kind of majority of the number of rough sleepers on the streets are new flow to the streets, so that's new rough sleepers coming to the streets for the first time. And, you know, the challenge there is really that we need to start taking a much more preventative approach in terms of how we address rough sleeping. So absolutely ensuring that services that are there to safeguard people if they cannot avoid reaching the streets, and there's kind of key services there to get them off the streets as quickly as possible and into a more sustainable way out. But that we're also trying to reach them much further upstream and intervening much earlier to stop them reaching the streets in the first place, if possible.
Just to interrupt you, we're just at the beginning of a new term, and this pledge takes us to the end of this current mayor's mayoral term. What's the ballpark figure to end rough sleeping by 2030, and how would that be financed? Because there's obviously issues around capital expenditure for things like refuges and additional new homes, but also revenue funding for those third sector organisations that provide services to homeless people. We heard at Housing Committee that there were concerns from providers who also work in the domestic abuse space as well, for those women who are survivors of domestic abuse who are homeless, that the single homelessness project funding is coming to an end, and I think the refugee housing programme is also coming to an end in terms of its funding. That's a real problem in terms of a hard stop for those organisations who want to plan programmes and help you meet that commitment.
Yeah, kind of long-term funding certainty is absolutely a key priority for the sector and for us. And we've been working really, really closely with the new government to try and secure that, including trying to secure a rollover of the kind of existing funding streams, so Rough Sleeping Initiative and the Rough Sleeping Accommodation Programme, the kind of revenue element there, into next year. And then alongside that, we're absolutely working on what London needs from the Comprehensive Spending Review in order to achieve an end to rough sleeping. And just to say that as you say, that will be kind of maintaining those important services through third sector bodies, but it's also coming back to Kate and Tim's point about borough capacity and local authority capacity, because whilst rough sleeping is only one type of homelessness, we absolutely see that resolving the TA crisis that boroughs are currently facing and having a more fleshed out offer for single homeless households, not in priority need, but also not rough sleepers either, that is absolutely fundamental to achieving our goals around rough sleeping.
Okay. And then, again, on the subject of your expenditure on homeless households and those rough sleeping, we heard at Housing Committee that we have Chain, which is really excellent by way of auditing, if you like. It's awful, but auditing the number of people that are rough sleeping. It's some of the best data in Europe. But there are some, again, I think Brent was mentioned as a borough that has piloted a new method to fully identify those people that need to be housed. And I just wonder, first of all, how you're working to whether or not you're looking at using that as a pilot and rolling that out across London, the potential cost of that, and I think you've allocated an additional £1 million for 25-26. So if that money is part of kind of expanding that wider pilot, and then I will come back on a wider question about the national budget.
Yeah. Data will be really important, and making sure that we're using the kind of world-leading Chain service that you mentioned as well as possible to put us in the best position to make strategic decisions about our services and our investment. And coming back to my earlier point about prevention, data is going to be really key to identifying who in the cohort of all the people in housing need are most likely to end up rough sleeping, and therefore we need to target our preventative interventions at those. We are in the process of, you kind of mentioned the additional investment next year of 1 million and then the kind of total 10 million across the course of this term. So we're in the process of currently working out how we're going to invest that money. The plan of action will be absolutely key to that. So we're working through the different options, including the important role that data will play going forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm not quite sure that you covered the point of how we might address any possible hard stop for those organisations that provide services in terms of their revenue, because 1st of April is coming soon. But I wondered if that sits within the context of, to be crude, what is London's share of the government's announcement of the £233 million? Is that sufficient?
Yeah, so we were very pleased to see the additional £233 million announced in the autumn budget, and that gives us I think, quite a bit of confidence that our expectation that particularly RSI and RSAP revenue will continue into next year. But what we absolutely need is confirmation from government on exactly how that 230 million is going to be spent, and we understand that should be coming forward in the coming weeks, but we're working with them really closely on it.
Okay. Before I hand back to you, Chair, just one final pushback. So when you say it will continue into next year, do you mean continue into next year, January, end of the year? Because that's really important.
Sorry,
for
I meant
business
next
planning.
I meant
financial
next financial year.
Okay, sticking on this topic, I have Assemblymember Georgiou.
A general rule. Sorry, this is probably for you, Megan, given the exchange on temporary accommodations, what I'm going to ask about. The general rule in politics, if you want to know what sort of any particular mayor of any political colour and what the government is discussing of the day, just keep an eye on press releases. And so TA, I think, is one of the biggest things that's going to be coming up over probably this mayoral term. A lot of London, well, I'd say a decent chunk of London boroughs, and this relates to the budget because this will impact on the GLA over the long term, already is, are refusing to look at out-of-borough placements in terms of outside of London. So can you just talk about, very briefly, your approach, the Mayor's approach to, aside from asking the government for more money, how we're actually going to tackle this issue in the long term?
Sure. So I think money will be absolutely fundamental to unlocking the crisis in statutory homelessness, but it's not just that. And I think the government's current approach of setting up an interministerial task force is really indicative of the kind of moment that we're in on homelessness and the level of ambition that there is here, and the recognition that it won't be just an investment that unlocks this. It will also be policy change from right across government and multiple different departments. And so one point I would really want to make is that, and we have been engaging with government on this and have made this point to them, is that firstly, the welfare system is absolutely critical to kind of closing that gap between what you can get through housing benefit and how that allows you to both relieve and prevent homelessness in each London borough. So the welfare system will be really key, but also working with the Home Office on migration and asylum policy, because in London we know that that's what makes homelessness and rough sleeping distinct in London from the rest of the country, is the quite high proportion that non-UK nationals make up of our homeless population here.
Right, and I appreciate, Megan, and what I'm about to say is no reflection on your response, but effectively what it sounds like is we're expecting more bureaucracy, and with the greatest respect, the government has given no indication, given its pronouncement on the Chancellor's statements, that we will be expecting a significantly larger package of funding than we've received historically. And just to illustrate the scale of the problem financially, I mean, if we look at Newham, so 50% per thousand, 50 households per thousand are in TA. Redbridge 27%, Southwark 25%. So the point I'm trying to make is the scale of the problem, given that we know of the financial challenges we're facing, the government allegedly says that they're facing, money I doubt will be forthcoming. So just in terms of long-term strategic thinking, what is the work that's going on with the boroughs?
Yeah, so just to come back on the point about funding. So the 230 million additional announced in the budget is truly additional. It's a net increase on the homelessness budget for this year. And government has indicated they want to spend that on homelessness and rough sleeping prevention. So, we're waiting to see the detail of how that money will be spent. But I think we have already seen an increase in investment. And whilst we don't know the London cut of it, I would absolutely expect that to come to London.
Sorry, Megan, and I'll leave it there, Chair, because, look, we're spending 114 million a month. So my point is 230 million, not even just for London, is not significant enough. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Still on the same topic, Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. So I think you haven't necessarily talked about actually the reasons why we're here in terms of the housing situation. This is probably the worst housing crisis I think anybody in this room has ever seen, and it hasn't just happened overnight, and it's happened because of a combination of reasons. Now, we've heard from one of the Assembly members as to it's taking a long time to do the house building, but actually, Tim, you very clearly set out how London has been very much at the forefront of building those homes despite those challenges. But obviously it has taken a significant downturn in more recent years. Can you tell us maybe a bit, just very headline, what those top reasons are as to why we've seen stagnation in terms of house building?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lynn set out quite a lot of this at the beginning, but, we've got a really difficult position where we've got both a housing crisis in the sense of housing need, but also a housing delivery crisis in the sense that the new homes which people need are not coming forward at the rate they need to come forward, and that creates a real imbalance, and that leads to all of the, not just the affordability issues that we've discussed, but also the kinds of homelessness and rough sleeping issues that we've discussed too. So, yes, it's. I mean, I don't know if I need to kind of totally rehash what Lynn said, but there are. I think it's this combination of viability issues and the fact that costs have gone up in this kind of really dramatic way for a whole host of reasons. Interest rates, it's a historic shift from, 15 years of incredibly low interest rates, up several percentage points to something which looks kind of more normal, but it's the level of increase which that is. At the same time as Help to Buy coming to an end, which affects demand for housing, at the same time as all of the affordable housing partners that we work with and that have historically brought forward and taken on affordable housing, facing unprecedented wider pressures on their finances, particularly relating to their existing stock. So it is a whole series of pretty fundamental things coming together, as you say, to add up to something which everyone you talk to in the sector describes as the most difficult in a generation.
Interesting you bring up interest rates as the first point. I won't ask how Assemblymember Hall voted on that leadership contest a few years back. But in terms of, you talk about one of the things that you didn't necessarily mention there, Tim, was actually about the labour market within the construction sector, and that has been impacted obviously by Brexit, by COVID, and by other things that have meant that actually we don't have the labour there to build the homes as well. One of the things I was just going to go back to Megan about was last year I was running a refugee charity. The government made a very, very cynical move at the time, which massively impacted on homelessness numbers on the streets, which has had a knock-on impact to what we're still dealing with now as a legacy. Megan, you want to just explain what that was? The moving on process.
Yeah. So, sorry, the announcement earlier this week.
No, so that was. I'm just going to a little bit wham and go back to last Christmas first. So, what was the situation that London faced last Christmas in terms of the moving on process and the impact of that on street homelessness?
Moving on.
Oh, okay. So I'll let you know. So the moving on process, which is basically when asylum seekers, sanctuary seekers, are granted their status, which should be a very happy moment for them to recognise that they can, be treated like anybody else in the UK. They then had what was 28 days. That was reduced to 7 days to find to get yourself a national insurance number, bank account, deposit, and find yourself accommodation. One of the biggest housing crises that we've ever seen. That was a situation that we had last year, which saw obviously a soaring number of rough sleeping. That has obviously changed, as you were about to say, Megan, earlier this week to
56 days.
56 days, yeah.
Yes, and so I think what this does illustrate, thank you for explaining that, I think what this does illustrate is the importance of bringing some of these different work streams together, and the important role that kind of migration policy plays on homelessness and rough sleeping. And absolutely, it's been a kind of joint endeavour between my team and the GLA's migration team with the Mayor's office to be campaigning for a longer move-on period, to give people more notice, to give authorities more opportunity to step in and support people to find accommodation. And yes, exactly, we are very pleased to see that change in policy and hopeful that it will have a positive impact on rough sleeping numbers in London.
Fantastic, thank you.
I would remind members again that this is the Budget and Performance Committee.
Sorry, there is a financial impact on local authorities, on the GLA, in terms of the government policy, which was both cynical but also massively impacting
Excuse me. In my experience, there's a financial impact of essentially everything, but we cannot be the essentially everything committee. Assembly Member Garbett.
I'm going to ask a few questions about the rent control homes. So how will the Mayor's 6,000 rent control homes starts by 2030 be funded? And will they be included in the 40,000 target for new council homes by the end of the decade?
Yeah, I think I'm probably best placed to take this one. Thanks for the question. So our expectation is that these will be like most mainstream affordable housing products, essentially. So we would expect some of them to come through the Affordable Homes Programme, very possibly a few in this programme, but most likely the successor programme after 2026, and then some of them also to be delivered through Section 106 agreements being funded by cross-subsidy on schemes. And that's standard for how we see social rent, intermediate rent, etc. delivered at the moment. So it's very much about mainstreaming this as an affordable housing offer. Our expectation is that, yes, if these are brought forward by councils, and we know there are some councils who are interested in the role of key worker housing, then they would count towards the 40,000 council homes target if they were able to complete in time.
So it does create another form of affordable housing, as you've described, and I just wondered what you've learned from the existing forms and their use in the planning system, particularly when there's a shortage of RPs taking on those affordable tenures. So I just wondered if that's been considered.
Yeah, so there's two slightly different questions there. So I think in terms of what we've learned from products to date, you know, we have learned that the sector is quite slow and cautious in adopting new and novel products. So that 6,000 target is stretching, but, you know, returning to the theme earlier, we think it's appropriate to set an ambitious first phase. Otherwise, we will never galvanise people into kind of action. We've learned that there is a need for simplicity and predictability. So we've worked really hard, and I'm sure you've seen the consultation which is out at the moment, but we've worked really hard to try and create what is a novel product, but which hits the appropriate balance between genuine affordability for key worker households on the type of income range that we're talking about, but also gives developers the certainty and sort of product familiarity that they expect in order to have the confidence to kind of submit planning applications that feature this as part of their intermediate housing offer. I think there are big advantages to this being a mayoral branded product, and with the associated press that comes with that. I mean, we're already actually seeing people writing into City Hall asking how they can get on the waiting list for one of these homes off the back of the consultation launching. So there is a visibility that comes with being a mayoral product, which helps give partners the confidence to bring these homes forward. And we saw that with London Living Rent, where a lot of our investment partners on the AHP, you know, they really wanted to be part of a new offer for their residents. And I think, you know, the signs are that that's going to be particularly the case here, with the key worker element being so prominent, and so many local authorities in particular thinking about the needs for their local economies in order to be able to attract and retain key workers. The second half of your question touches into a broader issue, which is that across the piece, and this certainly isn't going to be confined to key worker living rent homes. There are financial capacity problems within RPs, which means they are less able and willing to acquire the Section 106 units that developers are required to bring forward under the planning system. And I know we've spoken about this at Housing Committee. That is a pronounced problem in the sector at the moment. I think there are a few advantages key worker living rent homes actually bring there. So we know when we dive into what's causing the problems of Section 106, it's not just a case of RPs not having the financial resources to acquire affordable homes. They're also not particularly sold on the product that's on offer. And there are some multiple things going on there. It could be about management concerns. Often it's about cost, particularly around service charges arising from design. But there are particular issues around shared ownership as well, with the shared ownership, particularly in the kind of prime inner London areas, not necessarily being affordable for RP residents. And I think that's a real advantage of key worker living rent homes, because by being intermediate rent rather than pegged to home ownership, it's a genuinely affordable intermediate offer. So there's potentially an attractive proposition for developers to be flipping unsold shared ownership units into intermediate rent, and that being more attractive for RPs to acquire, because they have greater certainty that they'll be able to offer those properties to homes that can afford them.
That's really interesting and really helpful. I just wondered how it sat. I know we had a chat about viability earlier, but just how the rent control homes will sit with viability. And then a final question on the government's provision. Had the government provisionally agreed to fund this tenure, or what conversations have happened there?
So that interaction with viability is key. And if you read the consultation response, you'll see that we are explicitly asking partners to comment on the viability, and it is something that has weighed very heavily on our mind when we have been designing the appropriate rent levels. We have, I think, struck the appropriate balance between what households on the type of incomes we're talking about, so that's a maximum of 67,000 a year at a household level. I think we've struck the appropriate balance between what they can afford, if we take the London Plan definition of affordability, versus what is actually viable to deliver. So we have tried to find the sort of the sweet mid-spot of the Venn diagram, where you have a product that would require either the amount of cross-subsidy or grant that you would expect from an intermediate tenure, but that is more affordable than, say, shared ownership or the sort of intermediate rent that the NPPF policy would allow. In terms of government support, so we moved quickly in the summer to renegotiate the terms of the current AHP in order to allow intermediate rent, both as a precursor to this product, but also because there are other forms of intermediate rent that may come through in the programme. We were very pleased that in end of July, the Secretary of State granted us that flexibility. So we can now, in the current programme, fund any intermediate rent pitch that comes through to us. Obviously, terms and conditions of the new programme are still to be decided, and we'll be having those negotiations with government in early New Year into the spring. But I think our expectation is that having seen that government are persuaded of the importance of intermediate rent within London, our expectation would certainly be that that would be reflected in a future programme.
That's a really fascinating and helpful detail. Obviously, I'd love to see rent control homes for everybody, but that's really helpful to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. This is a question for Tim. Can you provide an update on the bidding process for the domestic abuse Safe Accommodation Homes Programme funding, and whether any bids for capital funding have been accepted, and are these on track to start on site by March 2026?
Thank you. Apologies, but I will just need to hand this over to Megan, if that's okay.
Perfectly fine.
Closer to it than
as long as I get an answer, I don't
Thank you for the question. So we set up this programme with some capital funding from the Affordable Homes Programme and some revenue funding from our Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation Programme to try and bring forward additional provision in domestic abuse. So the deadline for bids for that programme was kind of indicatively decided at the end of this year, and we've been working with a number of partners to try and develop out those bids into more detail, into something where we can allocate some grant against. We haven't made any formal allocations at this stage, but there are a number of kind of live bids in the process that we're working on and hoping to bring forward as quickly as possible.
Okay, but when we say as quickly as possible?
We're still hoping to have some on site kind of next year. Yes.
Next year. Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member, welcome. Assembly Member Moama.
Thank you. On the topic of the allocation for the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation Programme, again, in the Housing Committee have been looking at women leaving prison and the housing required to support them and their families. I won't bore you with the detail, but there is further information about kind of the numbers flowing between street homelessness and back into primarily Bronzefield, but other prisons close to London. So I just wanted to know if there will be any money specifically allocated to projects that support women leaving prison and how you might work with others. I mean, my jaw dropped when I think it was Probation said that they have 15 units in London, full stop. So will that form part of your work next year?
So on the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation programme, so we are fairly restricted in how we can use that money. You know, it's aimed at exclusively survivors of domestic abuse, as you would expect. So there may be, as you say, some crossover with women leaving the criminal justice system, but that money is allocated for that purpose. I'm not aware that under the domestic abuse programme we have any kind of specific services that directly meet that crossover, but we are in a moment at the moment where we've been consulting on the draft refresh of that strategy, and we're thinking about how we finalise that strategy and move into recommissioning some of the services under that programme. And absolutely think that if we have identified a need in that crossover, that is something we could consider. And just on the kind of homelessness and rough sleeping side of things, coming back to my earlier point about, different government departments and policy change being pivotal here, justice and the kind of justice policy and Ministry of Justice is crucial to that, and thinking about what discharge from institutions such as prisons looks like, and how we work in a more joined up way using systems thinking and using the Mayor's role as a convener in London to make sure there's a more joined up pathway for women and anyone leaving prison to prevent them from sleeping rough.
Okay. So with respect, the question is specifically around women leaving prison, because there are huge discrepancies in the provision for men and women leaving prison. And there isn't really provision for those women. I would, the research shows, and your own directorate's research shows that 70% of those women leaving prison are victims or survivors of domestic abuse. And so I would hope that as you reform your projects, that there is some funding which specifically takes into account, it's not huge numbers, it's 2 to 3 women a month, that there is provision, because at the moment there's lots of money being spent on domestic abuse supported accommodation, which is good, but not for those women and their families who really desperately need that support. So I'd really like to see that kind of reflected in budgeting for next year.
That's understood, and we can take that away for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question from me, actually, about sort of back to the boring business of delivery, specifically on GLAP. So perhaps a question for you, Simon. How many, so for the current and previous year and the year coming, what are the either delivered or expected numbers within GLAP? So the Mayor's, you were referring to earlier, the Mayor's sort of directly owned property land holdings, sort of complete starts and completions that we're expecting on that land.
So in terms of starts, couple of years ago, we were at, I think, just over 2,200 starts, so 22, 23, which tied in with the end of the previous Affordable Homes programme. Last year, I think we were at 672 overall, and this year we are looking at about 500, something sort of fairly similar to last year. We're hoping that over the next few years that will start to ramp back up, but as we've already explored in committee this morning, there are some profound issues and challenges in the sector at the moment.
So it's just the same delivery. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
So
it's the same delivery issues that we've heard. I don't want to rehearse them. Conscious of time, it's the same issues
absolutely,
elsewhere.
yes.
Okay. Do you have a kind of schedule of? I think you mentioned earlier it's a sort of multi-decade programme for delivering all of this land. I mean, you know, it's like essentially the entire Greenwich Peninsula, for example, is you know target of this plan. And quite a lot of that seems to me is sort of surface car parks. And when you talked about it being developed, I assume you're not including that as the ultimate plan of what the Greenwich Peninsula looks like. So presumably there's redevelopment for some of those sites. Do you have a programme of roughly over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what the build-out rate for that's likely to be?
Yeah, so you're right, there is some, I hesitate to say meanwhile use, but there is some quite a bit of car parking, unfortunately. Part of that is associated with a historical deal with Ancients Entertainment Group in relation to the operation of the O2 Arena. But that gets consolidated through the master plan into a multi-storey car park, so that would release up some of that land. We do have, and we clearly hold our development partner to account in relation to the delivery programme overall, of which is circa 18,000 homes on that one site over the next sort of 15 years or so.
On one site, you mean the peninsula itself, or individual bits within it?
The overall peninsula.
Okay.
So as we talk about Greenwich Peninsula, there's two development schemes there. There's one on the southern part, which is Greenwich Millennium Village Limited, which is in its final phase. That's a joint venture with Taylor Wimpey and Countryside, the Greenwich Millennium Village Limited joint venture. But then the majority of that land on the North Greenwich, sort of Greenwich Peninsula, is with Night Dragon, and that is delivering in its own sort of the planning consent there is just shy, I think, of 18,000 homes. But that is coming forward, as you correctly say. It's delivering on site at the moment with direct delivery through Night Dragon, but also through London and Quadrant, Housing Association registered provider, and that is delivering over the coming years as well. So there is a delivery pipeline in relation to the kind of the business plan for that particular project.
So there is a pipeline, that much I knew. I suppose my question was, are there numbers for each year against that pipeline? So obviously you've just described it dipping significantly over the last couple of years. I just want to get a sense of, you know, is it cracking on? Is it proceeding at pace? Is it dragging along very slowly? 'Cause it's a big piece of land. It's well located. It could have a lot of housing on it. It's got a lot of car parking on it. I'm not against car parking per se, but you can have a multi-storey car park and then some housing next to it, can't you?
Yeah, so I don't have the numbers directly to hand at the moment,
okay.
But it is cracking on, and we are hoping that the some of the interventions we're doing at the moment will be bringing forward quite considerable numbers over the next few years. We've got, for example, an area of that land that we took through with Night Dragon for release start of last year, and that will be announced hopefully early next year as to who will be taking that forward and getting delivery, and that will have 50 to 60% affordable housing within that subset of.
Okay. You said you don't have it to hand. That implies that it exists somewhere, and you could write to us after the meeting with it.
There is.
This is my optimistic face, you see.
There is a. Well, it's not. I haven't got the plan for the whole build out.
Okay.
But there are indicative numbers for the next 5-year look ahead.
Indicative numbers sounds great. Could you write to us with those?
Yeah, I can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final year of the Affordable Housing Programme, 21 to 26, is approaching. How many starts do you anticipate would need to be undertaken from 25 to 26 to achieve the target? And how will you manage the value for money given the necessary accelerated pace of the delivery in the final year of the programme? And that's for you, Tim.
Yeah, and I'll probably bring Heather and Tajmina in a little bit in a moment as well. But, as I was saying before, and we had this conversation in the final year of the previous programme as well, and, the way that these programmes work, ramping up towards the end, is what we'd hope and expect to see in this programme, and we would hope to see an upwards trajectory in delivery for the final year. The challenge of putting a number on it for next year is something I've talked about a bit already, but it's, what we will be doing is working absolutely as hard as we can within the parameters we've got. But equally, there are live discussions going on at the moment, both about those kind of in-programme flexibilities, which we'd like to see to maximise delivery, and all of that kind of more fundamental kind of out-of-programme support for the sector to enable our delivery partners really to continue with the development programmes that they have. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty. The target in the conditions that we've got and the delivery that we've had to date in the programme looks stretching, but what we need to do is understand the things that will help and really go after those, as well as working with what the team is doing is working every single day with partners in creative and innovative ways to try and keep delivery going. I think it might be worth Heather just saying a bit more about this, but I think we did a lot of this in the final year of the 16 to 23 programme. We delivered 25,000 starts in that year. It was a huge ramp up. I don't think anyone really expected us to meet that overall 116,000 target. And in that year we took an approach where we were going to absolutely leave no stone unturned and work effectively with partners. And I think we've kind of continued in that mindset, really. So even as the conditions are so difficult, the team is working day in, day out with trusted partners. And I think if you were kind of to have partners on the panel, I think they would acknowledge the kind of the work that we do with them and the kind of commitment there is to maximising delivery. Yeah, I just wonder if it might be worth Heather just giving a few kind of examples about the kinds of ways in which we're working to try and maximise that delivery and continue to evolve our approaches.
Yes, of course. So we've reported to the committee before about the launch of the accelerated funding route, which gives some more certainty to developer-led projects so that they can talk sensibly to RPs and try and get them back to the table. I had one in my own team where an RP and a council had fallen away. There'd been no interest at all in that site, and that programme allowed them to go again out to the sector, secure a partner and get 40 affordable homes secured on that. It's also opened up some slightly wider discussions with ones that don't quite meet the parameters, but we can have a sensible conversation. We had got one again in my own team where we actually took some external advice paid for by the developer to negotiate on your point about trying to maintain value for money, brought the subsidy level to a sensible amount and secured 300 social rent on that site, on a stalled site. And finally, we are, as Tim says, we're working tirelessly with our existing partners who are prepared to stay at the table and are still developing, but they can't do so with the existing procurement routes or tenures or subsidy levels that they previously talked to us about. And so we're renegotiating with those to get packages of projects through month by month that are ready to start in the latter part of this year and in next year in order to deliver as many as we can to the end of this programme.
Thank you. So I think just looking back at the context of where we are over this last financial year. So as of September 2024, just 2,124 homes have been started from the 4 billion AHP 21 to 26. 8% of the revised target of the 23,900 to 27,100 with 18 months to go, including just 347 in the first 6 months of this financial year. Now, before I ask the question to that, I will say that I think the team's been refreshing. I've been here since May. I think the set of officers here have actually given the most refreshingly honest answers that I've had since I've become an AM. So given what both Heather and Tim have just said, can you guarantee that the GLA will meet its target for starts by March 26 and completions by March 2030?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that might be the answer. And this goes back to the point that I think what we've heard from officers is, you know, they're left to pick up the curse from politicians, where they, particularly with housing, they set all these very ambitious targets, but realistically are never going to be met. So thank you, Chair.
But sorry, just to follow up. We had similar questions the year before the end of the previous programme, and we did meet that target. So I don't want to give, you know, unrealistic expectations that we're going to meet this target. I think the conditions are more difficult than they were 2 years ago. But, you know, one thing I can say is that we will be working absolutely as hard as we can to maximise the delivery that we can achieve. And you know, and it's a bit like the question about the 81,000 homes target as well. You know, it's right to have these levels of ambition.
With the greatest respect, Tim, no government, no mayor has ever lived up to the number of starts or completions that they've pledged to meet by the end of their term. So we may have within an individual year, they may meet those targets, but overall, it's never been met. So I'll just leave it there.
Assemblymember Garbett, you had a quick question.
Yeah, just a quick question just on the accelerated funding route. So I just wondered if you could say how many and what percentage of funded homes developed have gone through that route since it launched.
I don't have that figure to hand. We can come back to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. We add that to our letter that we can send to you afterwards. In that case, we go to Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you, Tim. This is for you. Are the targets set for the Affordable Homes Programmes 21-26 addressing the needs of the housing crisis?
I mean, I think the targets represent what was thought to be realistic when the programme was negotiated within the funding settlement that we have. I actually think that the 81,000 type of figure is a realistic reflection of the housing need and the housing crisis. Affordable homes are kind of one element within that. Even if we were able to meet the 21-26 affordable homes programme target, I still think there would be plenty more need out there to meet.
So sadly, it's no. Yeah, I understand. It is sad, and it is no. Was it disappointing that the GLA only received 100 million in top-up funding from the 21-26 affordable housing programme when it has repeatedly asked for 2.2 billion?
I mean, I suppose this comes back to the previous question. We don't think housing need overall can be met within the current parameters. We were really pleased to receive the 100 million. It will allow us to get more grant into the system, which is what's needed to support delivery.
But you've been constantly asking for 2.2 billion.
Well, I think the 2.2. Well, actually, the level. We do some modelling to look at, overarching levels of funding which might be required. I don't think that translates so much into an ask. I don't think anyone would have expected us to have been granted that level of affordable homes funding. But I feel like in many ways it is really important to get funding into the affordable homes programme. That 100 million was really welcome, but there are some bigger picture pressures on the sector here as well, and as we're going to have to make, the government is going to have to make some decisions in the comprehensive spending review about where it puts its investment. Part of that will be affordable homes programme specifically, but I think there's a wider need in terms of funding for investment in existing stock, for example, which indirectly but really importantly can free up capacity for delivery.
I get that, but if you're asking for 2.2 billion, either that was ridiculous, but if you're saying you needed it, 100 million, so I'll go on to the next question because
Kate might be able to express it slightly better than I
mean,
did.
Yeah, I know. I understand your position, but we've been listening to the Mayor screaming that the government needs to give billions, and you're grateful for 100 million now. But what level of funding will the GLA be asking for from the next Affordable Homes programme beyond 2026 in the spring spending review?
Well, I think this does go back to what I wanted to say about the 2.2 billion. So the 2.2 billion was the figure that we arrived at if you look at what our modelling, which has been developed for us by Savills, but we have the right to sort of manipulate the model. The 2.2 billion was what the model said you would need to take the revised 23 to 27,000 target back up to the original 35,000 in 2020. Now, that target came down, as agreed by government, for two reasons. One was because costs have risen, so we needed to be able to concentrate that funding envelope within higher grant rates for the homes that were available. But the other reason is because capacity within the sector, as we've been saying, had shrunk. So unfortunately, we are in the frustrating and perverse position where all of our LA partners, all of our RP partners, they see among their residents and their would-be residents a desperate need for new housing. They know that there is a need for housing, but they do not have the capacity to bring forward those homes at the moment, even if we stretch grant values beyond what would currently be considered value for money. So that's one of the reasons why the target came down. So that 2.2 million, it's a useful figure for identifying what it would need to take you back up to 35,000. But it doesn't mean that there are customers for that 2.2 billion, if you like. And that same factor is going to play into the discussions around the new programme, where we are going to have to be negotiating with government the correct balance between what does London need, and looked at in terms of the housing need figures. It is still pressing. That same model currently tells us that to deliver the 43,000 affordable homes that the previous SHMA identified would need 4.1 billion. Now, I don't think anyone who has heard a statement from Rachel Reeves thinks that 4.1 billion is going to be on offer. So we're going to have to both be talking with government about what is fiscally available, but also going back to that point about capacity, looking at the current challenges that our RP and local authority partners have. What are they actually able to commit to in terms of their own programme commitments? Because there's no point us having a programme that we can't offer to partners.
Yeah, all I'm aware of is that we've been listening to the Mayor screaming for billions and billions of pounds from the government. 2.2 billion, you've now been given 100 million, and Tim's just said he's grateful for that, against 2.2 billion. I asked how much we would be asking for the next affordable homes programme, because the Mayor has repeatedly said he needs 4.9 billion. Is it now that we've got a change of government, suddenly we're not asking for so much money? Because that's how it looks like. If you look at the requests before and the requests now, and things haven't got suddenly massively different in the last 6 months. I'm just wondering what you're going to be asking the government for now in the spring spending review, so it's very soon.
Yeah, so as I say, we are going to have to talk to government around what is the appropriate balance between what is the quantum of funding that meets London's needs, but also what is a programme that we think we can deliver. I don't think any of us think that we would actually be able to, within the short term, deliver a programme of 4.9 billion a year or 4.1 billion a year as the model has now revised it to.
And you couldn't have done before.
Don't have the financial capacity. And I think what is important to draw out as well is that I'm not going to speak to the politics here, but there is a genuine correlation between the timing that has occurred with elections, but also how these changes have been working out through partners and their own boardroom decisions and their own business plans. They have had to deal with a huge number of changes, both because of the macroeconomic changes, but also the regulatory concerns that we haven't spoken about a lot today. But there is a huge regulatory shift in what is expected in partners. And what we have seen through our programme management is it did take until the last financial year for that to begin to crystallise in their business plans. So if we had been speaking to them this time last year, they would have been a lot more optimistic about their ability to deliver.
I hear what you say. That's all I can say about that. So you're going to have these discussions with the new government. You were asking the old government for around 4.9 billion. So you're going to have these discussions. What level do you think you'd be happy at if they settled? You must have an idea because it's so soon.
I mean, I think it's going to be a negotiation. It's, you know,
of course it is. When we're going in for negotiations, a very round ballpoint figure, because they must know as well.
I mean, the other, just say the other point. I'm not sure that we've ever really presented that kind of figure of previously 4.1 billion a year as an ask to government. You know, that's just not the communication that we've had with them. It's modelling, which kind of suggested
I'm really referring to what the mayor's been screaming that the previous government wouldn't give. So, ballpoint figure, we've got 4.9 billion here that the Conservative government would have been asked for. Now it's a Labour government. A very round ballpoint figure of what you would hope to get. I know you don't know what you're going to get, but we're looking at a couple of months. What are you hoping?
I think the honest answer is, and it is the honest answer, that our parameter of success would be more about the proportion of a national fund that comes to London rather than the figure, because the AHP is at its starting point a national fund, and that will obviously be determined by the fiscal decisions made in the Treasury about how much funding the government wants to commit to affordable housing across the country as a whole. Our measure of success in terms of how well we've done our jobs in terms of negotiation will be what is the proportion that comes to London, and probably 30% is the sort of figure that will make us feel that we have, you know, we've done what Londoners expect of us.
30%. Is that how you worked it out before?
Well, it was a very, very different negotiating position last time.
Yeah, I'll bet. OK, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chairman.
I think, just for reference, I believe the Mayor did write to the government in early 2020, I want to say maybe June or July 2020, shortly after the last election, quoting from a report which did mention the 4.9 figure, and then produced a press release based on that letter, which I assume was the reason for writing the letter in the first place. So I think it's not correct to say that the GLA has not put that figure to government previously. Shortly after the last election, it definitely did. I have to say, putting the politics to one side, the thing that is most striking to me, returning to my theme at the beginning of this, we hear about housing associations and HRAs that are constrained in their ability to take on property. We hear about a government, the previous government and the new government, not being political, that is constrained in its ability to give us very large sums of money. We're talking about billions, obviously, tens of billions over periods of time. And a private sector which, when we talk about the private sector making a contribution, what that means is normal Londoners who are buying non-subsidised housing or renting non-subsidised housing being asked to foot the bill for all of these programmes. And I don't see that they've got lots of money either. And so I really wonder, I'm not going to put this question to you, but I continue to wonder whether we have a theoretical model of how we solve our housing problem that is not capable of solving our housing problem, because all of the three potential areas where money could come from, there is either a lack of money or certainly no excess of money. And in the case of the third one, the theory would be that we would make housing more affordable for everybody with a lowercase a. And it's, as I say, it seems to me that the whole system, I can't see how we get somewhere better than where we are now with the model that we have. Anyway, Assembly Member Georgiou.
Kate, very briefly. So, given your previous line of questioning with Assembly Member Hall, therefore, will you make clear to the government that if they don't give you the money that your modelling shows that you need to scale up development of the AHP, that you will be revising down your targets because you'll be forced to?
What the negotiations we're talking about are about the next AHP, so we haven't. We don't have targets for the AHP because it doesn't exist yet.
All right. So fine. Well, the government clearly will have a view as to what they want you to do, but will you be honest in saying, well, if you give us X, you will only get this amount of development?
Of course, it's not in our interest to be anything else and be lumbered with a target that we know we can't deliver. But Tim, you look like you wanted to.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, these discussions we have with the department will be entirely frank and open, and we'll be looking at scenarios for different levels of funding and what levels of delivery that could unlock.
Well, I appreciate the answer, but you've been lumbered with targets you're not able to meet, full stop. And that's no reflection on you. It's the targets as well as the back end of it, which is the actual development. So
we met the previous 116,000k target. The target for 21 to 26 has already been revised down from 35k to this range within the 20s.
Because it couldn't be met.
Because it couldn't be met, and that was the result of open and transparent negotiation and a realistic assessment of what we could achieve.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have the letter in front of me, and my reading of it, so it starts off with the new Affordable Homes Programme is due to start in April 2021, and I'm writing to request that we begin negotiations on how London's housing needs will be recognised in the programme. And it later goes on to comment on the 4.9 billion, and just scrolling down to find it, but to sort of quote directly, it says, to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge we face, joint research between GLA and the G15 group of large housing associations has found that we require 4.9 billion per year over 10 years to deliver the scale needed. So actually, I think that does speak to what you're saying in terms of it was a letter that started negotiation, and this is what the Mayor said, that this is what London needs. But it was, from reading the letter directly, it was a start of negotiation, but I just want to be clear on that. Tim, my question is to you. Has making the grant rates negotiable for the Affordable Homes Programme 21-26 improved outcomes in terms of delivery compared with the fixed rates?
Yeah, I mean, Heather's probably a good person to put some colour onto this, but, you know, I just, in the circumstances we're in, with the challenges that we face and with the way that they're shifting over time, I don't think it would have been at all tenable to have a kind of fixed rate, to sustain a fixed rate approach through this programme. And, you know, that level of day-to-day negotiation has been absolutely vital.
I agree in the current context. In the previous programme, it certainly was helpful for partners to know exactly what they were dealing with in terms of a tariff rate. It was very clear to the market, to the developers that they were dealing with, and so it was successful in that context. But in this current one, as I've said, everything needs to be renegotiated, and so to have that ability is the right call for this particular market condition.
But in terms of budget impact and your team, Tim, is that having an impact in terms of time having been spent on these individual negotiations, or do you think it's time well spent if it means delivering more homes?
That's exactly it. I think, you know, it's unavoidable. It is very intensive, and each one of these deals takes time and skill to deliver. But that's been what it's taken, you know, and you look at the kind of the starts numbers and you wonder, well, hang on a minute, in 22-23 the team was doing far more, but actually the intensity of the negotiations for each agreement is really high. But you know, that's the way that we've managed to kind of maximise what we've got in very difficult circumstances. And, you know, the kind of counterfactual would be to say we'll have some fixed, easy grant rates, but they'll be, you know, much higher, which is, again, is not the way to kind of protect value for money. I think, you know, it's particularly important that we kind of keep grant rates absolutely as low as they possibly can be in this context where there's upwards pressure all the time, because if we don't, then we're just not, you know, again, that limits our ability to meet the target because we've got a limited funding envelope.
Okay. And just in terms of the City Hall developer, so views of this obviously change over the years, but why is it now seen as the right approach for delivery, and what progress in establishing the City Hall developer can we expect to see in the budget year? Maybe that's on for you, Simon.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for the question. So I think we've previously talked about the kind of the work that we were doing to kind of inform the position as to how to bring City Hall developer forward, and kind of what were the best kind of scope and options and priorities and ways to do that. We've and all of that was kind of informing the position around the best route forward in the short to medium term is around kind of really focusing on public-private partnerships through joint ventures and investment partnerships. So very recent work we've been doing much in collaboration with MHCLG is around, as we've already briefly touched on, an investment fund, City Hall Developer Investment Fund. And this is very much building on the success that we had with the previous MHCLG land fund, where we had 486 million with a target of 8,000 homes to be delivered by 2030. And at the moment, we are tracking something in the order of about 13,500 homes should be being delivered by 2030 for that. So very much building on, as I said, the success that we've had in deploying that in a very flexible way into the sector. We're working on a joint business case to go through into the comprehensive spending review for a City Hall developer investment fund. Secondly, we've been doing a lot of work in relation to a strategic joint venture opportunity, and we're hoping that will be going through approvals early in the new year. And thirdly, we're doing quite a bit of work around kind of the launch and the branding, if you like, around City Hall developer, and kind of, I guess, in some ways, building on the great leadership that Lynn has been doing across the group collaboration piece in relation to the late Lord Kerslake's review of GLA housing delivery and how that is forming into the City Hall developer. And we're hoping that we should be kind of launching that, if you like, within probably spring of next year.
Okay, so when you say joint ventures, so I'm assuming there'll be levels of private development homes as well within what a City Hall developer is delivering?
Yeah, so it's looking at very much maximising the delivery of affordable housing, but how do we best go about doing that? And I think really at the moment that is about risk-taking and being more interactive, interventionist in the market, and taking more of that risk in a proper partnership approach with the private sector, so we can be doing more.
But Tim, you mentioned earlier on about the difficulty that you're seeing in sales data and private ownership levels and transactions in property. With that in mind, you also said that developers were looking at more build to rent models as well. So is that something that you'd envisage a City Hall developer looking into as well?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but I think, there's a whole different, array of delivery mechanisms in terms of how the homes can be built and how the homes can come forward in relation to what those models are. Very much there could be build to rent within how that comes forward. But as I said, I think, at its heart, it's about trying to deliver more affordable homes for Londoners.
Okay, but as far as you're concerned, in terms of the budget going forward, you made a submission to Government Treasury in the current budget submissions.
So we're working on a joint business case with MHCLG to inform an overall pitch within the next comprehensive spending review.
So for the 2025-6 budget, is there any impact, or are you still sort of in developing phases?
It's still developing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
There we go. We haven't really touched on fire safety remediation work, so just a quick question on that. The MHCLG reckons there are about 1,455 homes in London which are unsafe and awaiting fire safety remediation work, and expenditure on the Building Safety Fund has increased from 142.7 million to an estimated 250 million in 25-26. Will that increase be sufficient to accelerate the remediation work, therefore keeping London safe and reducing pressure on London Fire Brigade?
Thank you. Yeah, I think, as I was saying a bit beforehand, as it stands at the moment, the GLA has a relatively kind of limited role in some of this stuff. There are 3 specific programmes which the GLA manages on behalf of the department. But the government's made it really clear that they want to look at how remediation across, not just across London, but across the UK, can be accelerated. And we know that there are large numbers of buildings that need to be remediated in London outside of the programmes that we manage. So as I was saying before, we're working right now with government on how we want to work in partnership with them to respond to their national remediation acceleration plan. They want to work with local areas, particularly mayoral areas, including London, to kind of bring together local partners, understand barriers to remediation, and work on accelerating remediation across the board. And we very much want to be part of that discussion with government. We do think that the mayor has a kind of convening ability in London which we can bring to the table, but equally there are elements of this which are very much within the control of the national government. One of the factors at the moment, for example, is around the building safety regulator and delays there, both on the remediation and on the supply side, are causing real issues, and that's something which we're looking to work really closely with the ministry on.
But do you think that the additional funding is going to be sufficient to accelerate remediation works?
I think actually our work in this area is likely to change for next year. I think, as a result of this, these conversations with government, exactly what the GLA administers may evolve. We will certainly be looking for an acceleration in remediation, both in the buildings we currently manage, but in that much wider set of buildings. I think if you start looking at buildings at 11 metre plus rather than just 18 metre plus, there's something over 10,000 buildings in London which could potentially be in scope. And so, we're at a bit of a moment now where we're going to have a slightly broader strategic look at this.
But you'll forgive me if I observe that if the answer to the question was going to be yes, I think it is going to be sufficient to accelerate remediation, you would have said so. And you haven't.
I think the goal is certainly to remediate acceleration. We probably, we haven't got our kind of remediation lead here. It's difficult for me to give a specific example, but I think all of the work that we in government are doing will be to accelerate remediation. Just one point in our GLA budgets is that they, we operate on a zero cost basis. Any costs that we incur on our programmes are kind of paid for by government, so it's that if there's an increase in our budgets, in the GLA budgets, then that reflects an increase in the projection for delivery in that period. So that will be, that will be more remediation happening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. Look at that. I said we finished about 12. Well, extraordinary good timing. Well done, everyone. So can I thank all of our guests for our first panel? Oh, sorry, you were waving at me over there. I do apologise. A sudden thought?
I had a thought that might be helpful. So for this year, I'm chairing the Housing Committee, and I just wanted to suggest to members that much of the conversation, not all of it, obviously, but that's been had today around the policy context underpinning the budget is work that the committee has looked at, and I would really encourage members to look at the Affordable Housing Monitor. So it just feels like some of the questions that were asked are answered in that document, which already exists. And were the Deputy Mayor here, I'm sure he would keep telling people to refer to that public document. That was all.
I believe we have sent him to Korea, which is his reason for not being here. I don't think it's connected to the coup. But notwithstanding your plug for the excellent work of your committee, could I thank... Sorry? Yes, could I thank our first panel? Thank you, everyone, for your time and answering our questions this morning. We're now going to have a short adjournment of 5 minutes while we swap out for our second panel this morning. So we'll return at 7 minutes past 12. Welcome back to the Budget and Performance Committee meeting. I'd like to welcome our second panel of guests this afternoon, which includes Lynn Garner, who is back again for the second half. Thank you, Lynn, at the GLA Head of Housing Delivery. We have Graham Craig, Director and Chief Executive, Places for London. Good afternoon, Graham. David Lunch, Chief Executive Officer, OPDC. Afternoon, David. And Emma Williamson, Director of Planning at OBC. Afternoon, Emma. Jerry Murphy, who's Executive Director of Financial, Commercial and Corporate Services at LLDC. Afternoon, Jerry. And, excuse me. And Rosanna Laws, Executive Director of Development at LLDC. Good afternoon. So if I could start off with the question to you, Graham. Just what is driving the increase in capital investment in the 2025-26 investment programme compared with previous years?
So there's two different elements to that. I think the major one, of course, relates to, I assume you're talking here about TfL as a whole, and TfL as a whole has a major investment programme, assisted, I'm pleased to say, by the support that the government gave in the budget with £485 million worth of grant. But it would be, from a wider TfL point of view, better, I think, for TfL's...
Sorry, my apologies. So we're really only looking at the housing element, so it's only Places for London, or TfL, which is TfL's housing developer, for the benefit of people watching.
From a Places for London point of view, we have a major ramping up of our programme over the course of the next 12 months. It's probably helpful if I just give some context here, in the sense of we have completed 1,324 homes to date. We are on site under construction a further 3,000, just over 3,000, 3,059. Over the course of the next 12 months, we will be seeing the practical completion of sites at Wembley Park, first phase, 126 homes, Fenwick Estate, 46 homes, Barking, 98 affordable homes. Critically also, we've got planning decisions at Earls Court, that's 4,000 homes, Edgware 3,365, a planning decision, we hope, at High Barnet with the potential of around 300 homes there. We will hopefully have a planning decision at Southwark, which is 429 self-contained student studios, 40 affordable homes alongside that. We'll also make a decision on the delivery partner on Limo, which has the potential for around 1,200 homes, but that is the first phase of we hope, circa 3,000–4,000 homes that we will deliver as part of our East London partnership, which ranks alongside our West London partnership with Barratt London, that will see us ramp up activity at Bollow Lane, 900 homes over the course of the next 12 months. So, you know, huge amount of activity from a residential point of view. Even beyond that, we'll see main work start at 10 King William Street. That's above Bank Station. That's a 150,000 square feet commercial office scheme. Will also ramp up in our 9th joint venture, which is with Fastned, and that's delivering ultra-rapid charging hubs, electric vehicle charging hubs across London, starting on our initial 5 side seats, and we'd hope to have the first of those at Hatton Cross open in a little over 12 months' time. So huge amount of activity, but of course with that activity comes a significant up in our capital investment. I should say that none of that investment comes from TfL itself. We are entirely self-funded, and that means that none of the activity that I'm describing is in any way in competition with Transport for funding.
Thank you very much. Well, that's very much a change of tone from this morning. We've heard about lots of problems and delays, and you've told us about ramping up and cracking on. So I think that's excellent. Welcome change of tone. So actually you've described quite a lot of projects that are both completed and completing, and further projects coming down the pipeline. I was going to ask you for an update. I think you possibly, perhaps you could give us more details specifically on Edgware and Earls Court, which are two particularly large sites, I think due to provide 7,500, I think, between them. You're still on track for that number of properties on those two sites, you think?
Yes. So we submitted planning applications following extensive consultations on both schemes. We submitted the planning applications in summer this year. We hope, obviously, we're not in control of these, but we hope that our planning committees held later this year. We believe that both are high-quality schemes, bringing forward not just homes that London needs, of course, but wider commercial activity. Also, I wouldn't underestimate the wider impact we have at Earls Court. We're opening up the site so it can be walked across for the first time in a century. A new 4.5-acre public park, table park. At Edgware, it's a £1.7 billion investment in the local area, but we're also opening up, again, for the first time in almost a century, land to the public, 4.7-acre nature park. So in both cases, these will be transformational for these parts of London. The teams have worked hard on them. We've been grateful for all the feedback we've had from the public. Lots of events over a number of years. I think the feedback we've had has improved the quality of the schemes, but obviously they are going through the planning process now, and we'd hope that we get approval over the course of the next 12 months.
So what we've heard all morning is about costs going up, difficulties, delays, you name it, it's a problem. You haven't mentioned any of those things. Are they not a problem, or are you just
yes,
keeping
no,
on
they
top of
are
all
a problem. Everything I was listening this morning, I'm sad to say that everything was said still holds true. These are extraordinarily difficult times. Everything you've heard about construction costs, funding costs, the challenges more broadly in terms of the housing crisis and the criticality of getting on. These are not straightforward times by any means. As I say, we have completed 1,024 homes. Of those, 710, so 54%, are affordable homes. We recognise that given the estate that we've got, given the opportunities we've got, it is critical that we are not simply maximising the financial return, notwithstanding the fact that obviously the return that we make gets reinvested back into the transport network, but that we should consciously seek to address the challenges that London faces. And first and foremost amongst those, of course, is the housing crisis, and more particularly the affordable housing crisis. So it isn't straightforward. We generally, as I think the committee knows, we work in joint ventures. We and our partners are aligned in terms of the interests of what we do, and we strive hard to deliver not simply the homes that London needs, but to do so in a way that reflects the wider requirements. And at this point, it's as good a point as any for me to shoehorn in the fact that we're ranked by GRESB, formerly the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, again this year as 5-star, and more particularly we're recognised as being the leading sustainable residential developer in the UK and 4th in Europe amongst all real estate companies. So we strive to do the right thing, but it isn't straightforward by any means.
I was not expecting you to tell me it was straightforward, but I was just struck by the fact that I assumed that you weren't operating in a parallel universe where those problems didn't exist, but what I was struck by was that you seem confident that you can deliver the programme that you planned to deliver, and that you're cracking on with it, and so you seem to be getting on top of those problems and keeping on with delivery. Is that the general tone of the message that I'm hearing?
We're striving to get on. Again, I want to emphasise it isn't straightforward, and pace in particular is a significant issue. We lost, along with probably every developer in London, 24 months, given the lack of certainty over the changes to the building safety regulations. We are stuck, as are every other developer in London, with Gateway 2 delays again of an impact of the Building Safety Act. So the economic situation is by no means straightforward. From a regulatory point of view, there have been challenges. pace, again, given the wider challenges that we heard this morning, all of us want to get on and get homes built more quickly. I would love to be doing things more quickly than everything I'm setting out here. It isn't straightforward by any means, and I wouldn't want anyone to assume from what I'm saying that it is.
Understood. And then I think you did mention Limo Peninsula, but just in terms of an update on that, and actually for those who aren't familiar, it's a piece of essentially undeveloped piece of land between Canning Town Station and the river, just up the road from here. You're seeking a development partner. Do you have a sort of progress update on what stage that's at?
We shortlisted 3 parties. They have submitted their bids. We expect to be in a position to make an internal decision in January. We expect to be entering into a conditional joint venture in March next year, and we'll be going to the Land and Property Committee, which is a committee of the TfL board, for approval to enter into that conditional joint venture in March.
Okay, that sounds good. Look forward to it. In that case, we go to Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. Before I come to my actual question, this is just me wondering. So, Assembly Member Garrett asked you about why it seems that maybe TfL is struggling a little bit less than the GLA outlined this morning, but obviously there are some underlying conditions that apply to everybody. I just wondered, for my own interest, but also maybe for others, if there are differences between the way that you fund your schemes and the way that the GLA does. Do you have a reliance on grant versus lending? Are you able to borrow? Those sorts of things.
Our funding is different in the sense of our development activity is tied to, as part of the same company, is our commercial property arm. We've got 1,500 commercial tenancies, as you know, across London. Those generate a profit. There's also an asset value that's attached to those companies. In terms of income, we'll have gone last year from an income of £90 million to this year we're expecting to get close to, but not quite hit, £100 million. The value of those assets is £1.5 billion. We've got the ability to borrow against those assets. We also, our funding arrangement with TfL is such that if we dispose of an asset, then we have the ability to recycle the proceeds from that disposal into our housing, or particularly our housing development programme. We dispose of assets really primarily driven by whether it fits with our long-term investment strategy. We look to hold assets that are around the transport network as part of what we call campuses, mixed-use developments, where we already hold assets. For historic reasons, we own some residential, more retail units that are on sort of high streets in London that aren't connected to the transport network. We don't think it's sensible for us to continue to own those properties, especially given the liabilities associated with, for example, net zero. So we will look to dispose of those properties and reinvest the proceeds into our existing estate. And if you look ahead over our longer-term business plan period, we'll be investing £1.7 billion into our residential development programme. We are still, I should say at this point, dependent on grant funding in order to get to 50% affordable housing. Lynn, do you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the difference of the tone for this session. With the GLA's programme, we were looking at the affordable housing programme, where the vast majority is delivered by others and not by the GLA. And where the GLA land does come forward in its own developments, like Greenwich Peninsula, for example, those are in long-term development agreements that have been in place for many years and have quite a lot of constraints around them. The difference is that although we're all affected in the development sector by the challenges, what we have here are 3 development companies belonging to the Mayor who have a degree of seats at the table in joint venture arrangements, for example, more influence directly in terms of their developments. They're all at different stages, and clearly Places has a huge property portfolio to rely upon for its own borrowing and so on and so forth. So we're all different, but we are actually delivering in the market with joint venture partners with a seat at the table, and so there is a slight difference in terms of our influence.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. The clarity is really helpful. I wanted to ask you, so in our briefing it says that Places for London had an operating surplus of £6 million in 23-24 as a result of your joint ventures. And I just wondered if you could expand a little on that, because I don't know if that's part of how that money is then reinvested, what scope there is for that kind of surplus providing additional new homes across your land holdings, and then kind of counterbalanced against that, a bit of clarity around apparently new capital investments were down £58 million last year, how those two numbers are offset and what that means for ultimately for delivery.
Okay. The numbers will swing around really on an annual basis, simply dependent on where we are on individual schemes. We bring forward, if I focus now on residential specifically, we bring forward both build for sale schemes and build to rent. We want to have a growing build to rent portfolio, partly because it helps address market demand, but also creates for us the long-term income. Now, any long-term recurring income flows back to TfL as dividend. Any joint venture proceeds from for sale joint ventures doesn't flow back to TfL, but is 100% of that is recycled into our existing development programme. So 100% of profit from recurring revenues, including build to rent, but also retail or arches income, 100% of the profit flows back to TfL to invest in transport. 100% of the profit in terms of capital receipts, whether that's from joint venture proceeds or if we dispose of a site, that flows into our long-term investment programme. The numbers themselves will move around on an annual basis. As you've identified, there's a significant uptick coming forward. That's simply driven by the investment we're making in a number of build-to-rent schemes in looking ahead, Earls Court and Edgware, as well as the, for example, student scheme that we're looking to bring forward at Southwark, as well as commercial office schemes that will come forward initially at Bank Station or 10 King William Street, but also other schemes we're looking at in Charterhouse and Paddington. So the numbers move around, but that's purely driven by the projects themselves.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to ask you, Graham, last year you said that you're looking at bringing forward a social value policy in 2024, and I just wondered if you could provide us an update on where we are with that.
The first draft of it, we make Places for London together, which focuses in on our particularly arches and retail estates. So we introduced at the beginning of this year the London lease. That sort of really sets out a different relationship that we want to have with our tenants, where we encourage our tenants to pay, for example, the London living wage, to share with us environmental data that helps us work with them to reduce down their costs. We've instigated, indeed funded, a pilot training programme for an initial cohort of our tenants, where we educate the tenants on a number of factors, including sustainability and their own organisational resilience. We recognise that, given the estate that we've got, 95% of whom are SMEs, this really is the sort of an engine for growth within London, and that our role as a landlord is more than simply to collect the rent. Our job is to both support those organisations, but actually increasingly to connect that network together, and there's a huge amount that they can do to support themselves.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Harani.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask Graham about your build-to-rent properties as well, because obviously when you haven't sold or disposed of the property, it stays, your asset remains with TfL. And just sort of future thinking, I imagine part of having build-to-rent, obviously there's the opportunity cost of not building affordable. Is that financial? Is that some of the balances that you weigh up, whether you look at build-to-rent for a property or affordable?
So we are targeting 50% as an average across the piece. You've not asked me, but I'll ask the question because otherwise I'm bound to be asked. It's approximately a third between, within that 50%. A third social rent, a third intermediate rent, and a third shared ownership of the 50% that is affordable that we bring forward. The critical thing for me to say on affordable is that we don't, whilst we have the target of 50%, we don't set a target on individual properties that we bring forward in terms of the type of affordable housing. We are driven by what is the local policy, what is the local need. In the case of build to rent, we have a discounted market rent that we bring forward. So those are integrated in exactly the same levels of service, levels of amenity, levels of access as anyone else who is there. But the residents in the discount market units will pay a lower rent. Again, the actual percentage agreed on a case-by-case basis driven by local borough and indeed GLA policy. We tend to deliver 40%, as it happens, as the affordable ratio within our build-to-rent units. That therefore means that we have to make that up by delivering above 50% elsewhere. I should also say that given the wider challenges, some of our partners, actually less joint venture partners and more where we've disposed of sites, are coming back to us to say that they are seeking to negotiate down the levels of affordable housing given the other challenges that are faced. We point out to them that them reducing down affordable housing on one site simply puts more pressure on us because we still need to achieve 50% as an average. We would therefore need to do more affordable housing elsewhere. But yeah, for us it's driven really by the market. There are some locations where build to rent is viable. There are, particularly in central London, build to rent is much less viable in comparison with build for sale. Our job really across the piece is to deliver the homes, deliver the high percentage of affordable housing, and always to balance the books. And that means looking on a case-by-case basis as to whether it's most appropriate for a residential or commercial use, and on the commercial, whether it's more appropriate for build for sale and build for rent. Ultimately, we want to create long-term income streams, but in order to fund the programme, we do need to continue with a significant build for sale portfolio.
Okay. This question is probably more for Lynn, because we spoke about the City Hall developer earlier as well, and the Mayor had a manifesto pledge to look at the governance arrangements and tie them in with Places for London as well. Do you have any update or any information or progress on this?
Each of the organisations before us today and indeed GLAP have separate governance, and they're all separate legal entities. I think the overarching aim for the City Hall developer is to put a framework in place, because actually we're all delivering for the Mayor, and we need to be delivering to the Mayor's objectives. And then the other element of the City Hall developer innovation piece is where we've been concentrating on new money coming in, what new investment might look like, and what new products might look like. So whilst we are not at this stage looking at the complicated job of integrating governance, which will be time-consuming, complicated, and is probably not necessary, we as leaders in each of the organisations are working closely with each other on best practice, learning and strategic direction. And that's the way we've taken the integration piece forward, if that makes sense.
Okay, what about functions? Do you have any shared functions, or are you integrating any of those?
We have some functions that are delivered by the GLA to all of us, or by TfL to all of us, for example, shared services that we all have commonalities around. We haven't, since I've taken this role, got any new shared functions brought forward, although we do have leadership, policy and strategy meetings to drive things forward. We've got some shared initiatives around sustainability, around design standards, around learning and development and talent management. So we've brought things together, if you like, in informal collaborations as opposed to trying to change our legal structures.
Okay. Do you have anything to add on that, Jerry? No. Graham?
I was just going to pay tribute to Lynn, actually, which I don't do often enough, but let me take the chance here. Lynn, as the GA lead on housing, has done a fantastic job. She's not been seeking to... well, she's got us working better together than ever has been the case before, and the things that make a difference. The teams spend more time together. They know each other better. They collaborate. We share more of our plans. We share more of the lessons that we've got. It's those things that make the difference, I think. And I think taking everything that Lynn has done under the auspices of the JLA developer is something that I know I and everyone else on this panel welcomes going forward.
Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, just we have 23 minutes left approximately, and we haven't yet got to LLDC or OPDC. So, Assemblymember Garbutt is going to ask an extremely short question.
I am.
If I could invite an extremely short answer.
Really
as well,
quickly,
that'd be brilliant.
Graham, you mentioned the dependency on grant funding for affordable homes, and I just wondered if TfL, in Places for London, have looked at kind of social investment funds or kind of pension fund investment. Is that the kind of thing you explore? Lynn's nodding.
Looked at, still, well, it's something that we've looked at. We haven't landed anything along those lines. It continues. All of us wrestle along this panel with all the challenges that you've heard this morning, and all of us, I think, are endeavour to be creative in terms of looking at different mechanisms, certainly share with each other the work that has been done. We have looked at, but not yet landed anything along the lines that you're describing.
Great, thank you.
Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. And I'd like to say it does work when you get teams together, because you can cut times on sorting things out so much quickly. And massive congratulations, because since we've been moved to this bloody awful building here, there just isn't the space for our staff to get together like they used to when we were in the proper City Hall. So well done, Lynn, because that's vital. Graham, to what extent do you see slowing rental growth in London impacting the viability on rent or build-to-rent schemes?
We're bringing forward mid-market build-to-rent schemes immediately positioned on London's transport network. We're not making outlandish assumptions in terms of future rents. We are looking that there is rental growth. If you look historically, rental growth tends to be tied very closely to wage inflation. We're confident in the assumptions we've made. If anything, well, not if anything, there is more pressure on rents at the moment, and a number of different elements have meant that more of the individual build-to-rent landlords, the individual rental landlords have come out of the system. What we are seeking to do is to build high-quality, mid-market build-to-rent with, I think, reasonable rental assumptions. That is about as safe an investment as you would find anywhere if you're doing so around the transport network in London. We're absolutely in this for the long term and confident about the long-term metrics.
Yeah, and people are going to have to be nearer stations, because unfortunately an awful lot of time and energy has been spent trying to push through unpopular schemes in outer London over car parks. I have to tell you, as an outer London person, if you want us all to use the TfL network, which we all want to use, we're not like in central London. We have to go quite some way before we get to our station. And then when we find out that you're looking more and more at using car parks and building on them, it is really unwelcome and unhelpful. Are you still looking at High Barnet to be building on that?
We are looking at High Barnet in the draft local plan. The station is identified as being suitable for development. The London plan and the Mayor's transport strategy both support the development of brownfield land for housing. We've had this discussion before, and I will say again that the bulk of people who are using our car parks in outer London on the outermost parts of the network are people who are coming in from outside London, and I absolutely understand that for them it is convenient to drive in, but as we've seen, I guess a classic example would be Black Horse Road. Black Horse Road, and we've built 350 homes, 50% affordable housing. I defy anyone to go and look at that scheme and think that that location was better served by a car park.
Well, and people in outer London want to get to the end of the line, Stanmore, etc., in order to get into London to work. And we've got to get people into London to work because, as we all know, we've got a shortage of housing in London and rents are so high. Can you answer, if the 50% affordable rule was scrapped, how many additional homes do you think could be built each year?
From my point of view, not one, I don't think.
Really?
And I think, yeah, and for what it's worth, just as the person who heads up Places for London, I do not see the 50% as being some kind of target that's imposed on us. Our job is to do what it is that London needs. London needs affordable homes. We own, TfL owns, thousands of acres of land in London. I see it as being my job. It's not the only thing that London needs, but at the top of the list, affordable homes is what we should be doing. Just briefly, if you'll indulge me, we have, just one fact, we've trained up, there are 3,000 people who are now in employment who we have trained up on construction skills. There's a whole variety of things that we're doing with the land holdings that we've got, and I and my team feel passionately about we should be doing the right things for London, not simply because we're instructed, but because it's the right thing.
OK, so can I tell you, Londoners feel passionately about the ability to be able to drive to their car parks and get on a train to go to work. So please bear that in mind. I don't think the London plan is fit for purpose, but please bear in mind, keep building on these car parks is all very well, but you are stopping people accessing the TfL network. Thank you, Chair.
We must now move on finally to the London Legacy Development Corporation. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you. Thanks for waiting patiently for your questions. I had one kind of opening question just to get to speak to Rosanna and Lynn at first, just about at the completion of current plans, what will be the proportion of affordable homes delivered on the park and in the wider Mayoral Development Corporation?
Sorry, thank you. If I start with the wider Development Corporation area as a planning authority, we have a target of 33,000 homes to deliver up to 2036. Of that, a total of 13,000 have been delivered, with a further 11,000 homes in the pipeline, and the balance are enshrined within the local plan. And as we've now handed over the planning powers to the local host boroughs, their responsibility will be to ensure the delivery of that. In terms of that, I think the overall target is somewhere in the region of about 35% in terms of that wider target. But we can clarify that in case I've got that wrong. On our LLDC land, we've got the responsibility to deliver just over 5,800 homes on LLDC land, and that's across 5 neighbourhoods. So we're on site. We've completed just over 1,100 homes, 1,180 homes. We're on site with a further 400 homes, and next year we'll be on site with another 1,100. So in total, that's 44% of our pipeline. And of those, and in total, once that has been delivered, we will have delivered somewhere in the region of about 42% affordable across the entire portfolio. Now that deals with the earlier policy, whereby our target was 35%, and we're now focused on delivering 50% affordable across the balance of our portfolio. And they're the last 3 neighbourhoods in our portfolio at Stratford Waterfront, Puddingmill Lane and Rick Roberts Way.
Thanks. That's a very, very packed-in answer there. Just on the ones you reeled off in that concluded in the 44%, did you say that is those to be delivered by 2036? Is that the numbers that you were listing there?
So of the of those, the 44% of LLDC's responsibility in terms of delivery on our own land, I would say those 44% would be delivered absolutely by 2036, but probably earlier than that.
Great, thank you. Just a quick reflection. What do you think we can learn from your MDC to help inform the development of future MDCs to deliver more housing?
So as one of the Mayor's development corporations, we've got land, we've got funding, and we've got the dedicated responsibility to deliver homes and wider regeneration. So we've got planning powers, we've got land, and as I said, we've got funding. So we act as a master developer, and we're very, very clear about our responsibility in that space to deliver the regeneration responsibilities, our inclusive economy agenda, and those homes. In that capacity as acting as a master developer, we can de-risk the scheme, so basically get planning consent in place, and then work with the market in a partnership arrangement. In our earlier schemes, we entered into development agreements, and we participated in some of that risk, and that's the market risk with those developers. But in our later phases, we're delivering those schemes in joint venture, and last week we announced our joint venture with Vistry on Pudding Mill Lane, which is another 900 homes, with about 30,000 square metres of 30,000 square feet of commercial floor space. In those joint venture arrangements, we can participate in the risk, we can put equity into those schemes, and then we can sit alongside the market to deal with the challenges that you heard in the earlier briefing, and Graham has touched on some of those. So I think, having a dedicated team, having some of those tools in place, and acting in a comprehensive way across those land holdings, I think is really fundamental in how you can bring forward delivery and wider socioeconomic benefits.
Great, thank you.
Okay, maintaining our excellent pace, Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Jerry, this is for you. The current GLA Affordable Homes programme has targeted a higher number of social rent homes than the previous programme. Could the LLDC deliver more social rent homes within the constraints of its long-term model?
I might ask Rosanna to come in on that, Susan.
Yeah. I think that would be, obviously we're in the place whereby we want to deliver homes and more low-cost rent homes for Londoners and for local residents. What we have across the portfolio is we sit alongside, we seek to balance the Mayor's objectives and of course the local borough objectives in those planning consents. In our approach, we have focused in particular low-cost rent homes towards family typologies, so homes with 2, 3, and 3+ bedroom units. I think overall we would like to deliver more. If there's more grant in the system, we can explore that with the market and with our joint venture partners. But I think it's really, really difficult unless there's more grant in the system to help deliver more low-cost rent.
Okay, so not without more money.
Correct.
Fair point. Jerry, what progress is being made towards the LLDC becoming self-financing?
So in this budget that we've presented, we see a year-on-year 40% drop in the revenue grant requirement on revenue funding, and that reflects the changes in the organisation. It reflects changes in the way that we have contracted with venues and with our estate management. It reflects the end of our regeneration programme funding. So the revenue grant year for year sort of drops from about 23 million to 13.5 million in 25-26, and the trajectory is to make us self-funding by the very end of the 2030s, mid to end of the 2030s, and that's predicated on a number of things. It's predicated on the growth in the fixed estate charge, and we're seeing that growing now. I think it's at about 5 million in the current year, but it's projected to grow to about 15 million by the end of the 2030s. We're seeing increases in these years, particularly on East Bank, but also as the housing comes through. And the other thing that we're looking at very hard is increasing commercial income. That's not without risk, but we're looking, for example, at things like digital signage to try and bring in additional funding. So there's growth in income, suppression of costs. We're about to embark on phase 3 of the organisation. The transition is going well. Planning powers have handed over. We're on track. New leadership in the organisation. We've got a new chair and a new chief executive. I'm handing over the chief finance officer role in January. All of these things are building towards making us more sustainable. So I think I'm not saying that's an easy thing, but I think the focus of the organisation is on that bottom line, financial sustainability.
I know I've asked this question many times, and I'm sure the answer seems to be getting further and further into the future, but I should have looked that up before I came in, and then I could have thrown the figure back or the date back at you.
No, I think that's not unreasonable, because we've seen for all something like the fixed estate charge, on which we're very dependent, the growth in that is aligned to our development programme, and we've heard today how difficult those development programmes have been, notwithstanding. I think Rosanna's...
So you're able to pay the loan back to the GLA without any issues at all?
The long-term model is still in surplus, yes, so that's a really important test for us. Long-term model in surplus, paying back the funds to the GLA, financial sustainability on our revenue budgets, 2 big challenges, but from where we are today, they are on, they're on a trajectory for success.
Good. And just help me with this, because I only look at this really once a year. So the loans that you're actually getting, the grants that you're getting are not used to pay back the loans to the GLA in any which way. It's 2 completely separate things.
No. So there's revenue grant and capital grant. So the revenue grant is not part of the loan. There are future capital grants coming in. Graham talked about being able to deliver 50% affordable housing with the help of capital grants. That's part of the mix of repaying the borrowings in the future.
Is it? OK, I might come back with some further questions that I'll put in writing. Thank you.
Yeah. I was going to say, in writing sounds excellent, given that it's now 12:54. Assemblymember Mohammed, did you have a very quick question on LLDC?
Brief. Yes, very brief. And for either Rosanna or Jerry, I think. So with the powers coming back to boroughs, to host boroughs, and presumably decision-making and monies, I have a very specific question about funding for traveller sites, or a site, on the Hackney-Newham border, which was part of the overall agreement that LLDC had way back in the day. And I, first of all, want to know, where's the money? And which borough would it be going to? And can you reassure me, so I can go back to my boroughs and say that LLDC will see out this commitment to re-provide a site? I mean, I would prefer, obviously, on the Hackney side, but it's something to take up. We can discuss it after. But I just wanted to put that here because it's a real live issue at the moment.
Just very quickly, I think you're referring to the Bartrip site in Hackney. LLDC allocated 2 million in 106 and SIL contributions to that site. That was to be drawn down by Hackney. It was not drawn down in order to deliver that site. And as we handed over planning powers to the boroughs, we also handed over SIL that had not yet been drawn down. And that proportion of that 2 million was drawn from a scheme within the London Borough of Newham. So that 2 million has now been returned to Newham. So it will be for Hackney to take forward the delivery of that scheme. So we've allocated the funding. It is in our local plan until, of course, Hackney comes forward with their revision to their local plan. But the planning status remains as long as the London LLDC's local plan status is in place.
So in short, if something comes forward on either side, then you can continue conversations with the relevant local authority, the planning authority?
They can, yes.
Okay.
Great. That brings us at long last to OPDC. Apologies for keeping you waiting. And Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. David, nice to see you again. Emma, thank you for joining us. And so we've seen, obviously, a seismic shift in terms of what the OPDC is about, from being a strategic planning authority to very much getting into developing and developing on the ground stage, which has seen some budgetary changes off the back of that. First of all, before I come to those, David, perhaps could you just tell us where we are in terms of the Land Assembly? You came to, I think, a plenary back in March before I got elected to say that you were very much hoping to making significant progress in terms of largely collating that Land Assembly. Where are we now?
Yeah, thank you, and it's good to be back. So I think we're in quite a strong place. We've currently got about £150 million worth of assets under our control or ownership. With a bit more work to do. We've got some agreements to acquire 2 major sites early in the next financial year. So we're well on the way now, I think, to having control of all of the land that we will need to support and sustain the redevelopment at Old Oak. And that includes not only sites that we're acquiring through our Land Assembly programme, but also, of course, moving quite rapidly, I hope now, to an agreement with the Department for Transport, Network Rail and government colleagues on a comprehensive land pooling agreement, which will put our land into a land pool with the government land and the Network Rail land to give us a unified development platform that we will be taking to the market probably around the middle of next year.
So we've heard, obviously, throughout the morning and afternoon the difference between sort of the situation where we've got with Graham's programme, where it's wholly owned land, the challenges this morning we're actually trying to bring that together. One of your risks that you've identified is that failure to secure the land going forward. Where would you say, in terms of sort of the probability of that risk is at the moment, the likelihood?
I think we should be pretty optimistic about the position, because we're likely to need a CPO process next year, and that's something that we're likely to be bringing forward to the Mayor over the next few months, because we'll need mayoral approval. But our assessment at the moment is that that's likely to be a relatively straightforward and light touch CPO, because we've been so successful in acquiring sites through private treaty. And of course, one of the crucial tests that any public agency needs to demonstrate if you're going through a CPO process is that you are actually in a position to see through the reasons why you need a CPO. In other words, you've got a strong basis for a comprehensive redevelopment scheme, and we think that we have that. So subject to finalising the legal agreements with government and Network Rail colleagues, which we expect to do over the next few weeks, I think we should be pretty optimistic. So it's an absolutely relevant risk, because if we fail at any juncture, then obviously it compromises the project. But at the moment, I wouldn't regard that as a serious risk.
Well, that's really positive to hear. Just the impact of that, of course, on your revenue is that you've asked for additional revenue this year. There is within that a line that suggests that your £2.3 million worth of savings that are still to be identified. Where are you at in terms of identifying those savings?
Yeah, I think that the 2.3 million of savings, I think is, I think it's the way that the Mayor's consolidated budget sort of describes this. So that 2.3 million, subject to the next stage of the consolidated budget process, will appear as a contribution from the GLA to OPDC. So it's actually not requiring us to make core savings. It's actually a 2.3 million sum that the GLA is being asked to contribute to OPDC next year.
And that's, of course, part of the ramping up to making sure that you're able to deliver on all of those commitments to make sure that the programme is deliverable.
Yep.
We've talked about some of the challenges in terms of the wider sector in terms of deliverability. So you've also asked for additional capital funding, and clearly, as you look to develop more homes, what confidence do you have in terms of your ability to be able to spend the additional money that you're asking for from a capital point of view?
Yeah, so we've asked for additional loan funding from the GLA. So first point to bear in mind is that this is a loan, so we anticipate repaying that, and so does the GLA. The reason why we've asked for that is not necessarily that we will spend it all next year, because as you see from the profile, we're likely to require that over the next couple of years. But it is quite important that we know that we're in a position to secure the land that we require. And of course, it's also necessary, if we are going to go into a CPO process, for us to be able to demonstrate that we are in funds, or that we will be in funds, to complete the process with the necessary compensation payments. So I would anticipate, given the pace of our land acquisition programme and any residual land that or assets that we may require through CPO, that we'd probably complete that within the next 2 years.
And if you were not to receive that additional funding, how would that impact on the project?
Well, it would be quite difficult for us, I think, because, as I say, in order to secure all of the sites and the land interests that we need, we will, at some point fairly soon, need to demonstrate that we will be in a position to actually see the process through and pay the necessary compensation and acquisition costs. So were we to be compromised in that, I think we'd need to look again at the timeline, which would be disappointing, because we are driving very hard at the moment with government and rail colleagues to ensure that we see housing starts, substantial housing starts, within the lifetime of this Parliament.
That's it from me, so thank you very much.
I've got a few extra questions, which can I put them in writing, because I'm mindful of the time. Thank you. Thank you.
I don't see any other indications, which is just as... Oh, go on.
Rosanna, just quickly, when you were saying that 42% was affordable homes, can you just break down the tenure of what the 42% what's like social homes, shared ownership? You can write to us if you don't have it to hand. Thank you.
This is the stage of the meeting where could you write to us is exactly the right question to be asking. It's now 3 minutes past 1 in a meeting that finishes at 1. So could I thank our guests of our second panel this afternoon? Thank you very much, and for your slight forbearance in our mild overrunning. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion, and also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note the quarterly monitoring reports? Noted. Good. Can I ask the committee to note the committee's work programme and its dates? Excellent. The next meeting of the committee will be held on the 12th of December, which is tomorrow, 2024, 10 a.m. in the chamber here in City Hall. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority.